And I see Judge Velasquez and Judge Cooper, my co-judges in the courtroom. Are you guys good to go? Do you need anything before we get started?
No, I think I'm good. Brandon?
Good to go as well.
Great. We'll get started here when we're told to.
This round is good to go and can begin. Thank you for your patience.
Great. All right, before we get started, I'm not obviously a scoring judge here today, but when I am a scoring judge, I appreciate it when I have the parties help me fill out my ballots. So we're not on the record. I'm not asking for appearances. I'll do that here in a minute. Let's just go down the line and make sure that the scoring judges have everybody's names. So let's start with the plaintiff. And once you guys just tell us who's doing what, give us your names kind of in order so we can make sure that those are filled out correctly. Starting with the plaintiff's opener.
Joshua Kennedy.
Okay. And Judge Velasquez and Cooper, chime in here. Let me know when you're good to go. First witness from the plaintiff.
Angel Rodriguez, played by Amber Mills.
Who will be doing the direct examination of Mr. and Mrs. Angel Rodriguez?
Joshua Kennedy.
Okay. So that everybody knows what's the gender of that witness.
Female.
Okay. And obviously non-binary is an option. I'm not trying to limit anybody, but okay. Cross-examination of witness Angel Rodriguez.
That's going to be Allison Yates.
Okay. Second witness from the plaintiff.
That will be Dr. Kwan, portrayed by Vanessa Garcia.
And gender there, so everybody's clear.
Female as well.
All right. What was the name of the name of the actress, I guess?
Vanessa Garcia.
Vanessa Garcia. Who will be directing the good doctor?
Yesenia Ireland.
Okay. Are my scoring judges good to go with all that?
Yes, I've got it all down. Thank you.
Cool.
Yep, good to go.
Cross-examination. You guys stay off mute for the time being, guys, so that we can make sure everything's filled in. Who's cross-examining the doctor?
That would be Andrew Christian.
Great. Third witness from the plaintiff.
That will be Casey Soto, portrayed by Alyssa Aguirre.
Gender there?
Female.
All right. And the direct examination of the third witness?
Will be by Caleb Holland.
Cross-examination from the defense?
Cross-examination will be handled by Dylan McDowell.
Okay, do my scoring judges have all that?
Yes, thank you.
Shifting into the defense case, the first witness from the defense.
First witness for the defense will be Harper Martini, played by Caitlin Bryant.
Gender there?
Female.
Cool. Who's doing the direct examination of Miss Martini?
I am, Your Honor, Dylan McDowell.
Excellent. Cross-examination from the plaintiff?
By Joshua Kennedy, Your Honor.
All right, my scoring judge is good with that.
Yes.
Second witness from the defense?
That would be Dr. R. Cannon, portrayed by Ella Napier.
Ella Napier, gender there.
Female.
And direct examination,
Andrew Christian.
cross-examination from the plaintiff?
Will be by Yesenia Ireland.
All righty, we good to go there, scoring judges?
Yes, good to go.
Okay, and the third and final witness from the defense.
Third witness is going to be Austin Lewis, played by Thomas Cassidy, and the pronoun is going to be male.
We've got our first male witness. I thought it might be a full sweep. All right, and who is directing that witness?
Allison Yates.
Thank you, Ms. Yates. Cross-examination from the plaintiff of that witness.
Will be by Caleb Holland.
And then the closing argument from the plaintiff. Well, I should wait. Scoring judge is good with our final witness.
Yes, we got it.
And then closing arguments.
For the plaintiff will be Caleb Holland.
And from the defense.
The defense will be Dylan McDowell.
Great. All right. I hope that was helpful for the judges. It's always helpful for me when I have to fill these things out. Do my scoring judges need anything else? Because they're far more important than I am to you guys because they decide who wins.
I think we have all the information we need. Thank you so much for you guys for introducing ourselves. We really appreciate it.
All righty. Well, then with that, we will go on the record in Genesis Petreo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge Jake Friedberg. I'll have both sides formally make their appearances.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Yesenia Ireland, and I, along with my co-counsel Joshua Kennedy
Good morning, Your Honor.
and Caleb Holland, represent the estate of Genesis Petrillo in today's case. Before we begin, we have a few pretrial matters we would like to address, or would you like the defense to make appearances first?
Yeah, let's get appearances first, but I appreciate that, Ms. Ireland. Appearances from the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Allison Yates, and along with my co-counsel, Andrew Christian,
Good morning, Your Honor.
and my other co-counsel, Dylan McDowell,
Good morning, Your Honor.
we represent Harper Martini.
All right, so I welcome all of our attorneys and participants. Let's have housekeeping matters from either side.
First, we would like to make it known that the plaintiff is pursuing battery per pretrial orders dated September 29th by Judge Gugliazza. We would also like to draw your attention to stipulation 3 that says exhibits 1 through 10 have already been pre-admitted. Both sides have already agreed on this, and they may be referenced in the opening statement.
Is that the understanding of the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and that was specifically exhibits 1 through what?
1 through 10, Your Honor.
1 through 10 have been stipulated as admissible or as
Pre-admitted, Your Honor.
admitted. Okay. Okay, appreciate that.
May we treat you both as judge and jury?
I don't know who else you'd look at.
May we assume that all exhibits have been pre-marked?
Well, here's what I do, and I know it's a little different than what other mock trial judges do. The way that the exhibits are marked in your case, I consider as marked for identification. So everybody knows what we're talking about. When you admit something in my courtroom, then I change the way that they're marked so it's clearer the order in which that they were entered and by whom. And so the plaintiff's exhibits, when they come in the order they come in, will be plaintiffs 1 through will be numerical 1 through whatever. When a defense exhibit comes in, it will be alphabetical. So defense A through whichever. I know it makes it a little harder for you guys sometimes to keep track of everything, but it makes a clearer record, and it's the way things happen in the real world. And so that's the way that I do business. I appreciate you asking me about that. I will make it clear when you admit exhibits how I have marked them, and I expect everybody to keep track of that as much as possible. But certainly it's not something that we're going to give you a hard time about if you revert back to the way that things are numbered in the problem.
Yes, Your Honor. May we invoke Rule 603, which calls for the constructive pre-swearing of all witnesses prior to their testimony?
Yes. Are there any requests by either side for advisory witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, then all of the witnesses are constructively sequestered.
May we invoke Rule 615, calling for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses bearing party representatives?
Yes.
Can we assume all evidentiary arguments are heard outside the earshot of a jury?
Yes.
Do we have the court's permission to display demonstratives, aids, and exhibits as needed, or do you prefer we ask each time?
I'm going to ask that you make the request, especially if we're dealing with something that's not been admitted into evidence and is on. Let's just ask, that way I can control what the jury sees and what they don't see, and so we avoid a mistrial.
Yes, Your Honor. Time allowing, may we have a brief recess at the conclusion of the plaintiff's case in chief?
It's very much up to you guys and how we use our time. But yes, that's generally my practice.
Your Honor, may we choose whether to stand or sit during opening and closing statements, or do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. Make yourselves at home, because you probably are.
And finally, Your Honor, time allowing, may we also have a brief recess at the conclusion of the defense case in chief prior to the start of closing arguments?
Same answer. We're going to see how time goes. I'm hoping that we're going to be expeditious in the way that, and judicious in the way we use our time. And so long as we're not short, I give plenty of time at the appropriate times.
With that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any housekeeping matters from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We would like to, under Rule 615, introduce our party representative, Harper Martini. And we would also like to ask Your Honor's preferences on presenting and entering evidence.
And I guess, explain to me what you're requesting.
For whenever we publish evidence to the jury, do we need to ask you beforehand?
Yeah, I spoke about that with Ms. Ireland. I would ask that you ask permission to display demonstratives to the jury. That way I can control what they see. And so you just need to ask for permission to publish.
And do we need to ask for permission to approach opposing counsel?
No, let's just make sure that both sides if we're mentioning an exhibit, let's make sure that it's clear to the other side what exhibit we're talking about. You don't need to ask to approach, but if you're going to publish something or impeach, make sure you tell opposing counsel, I'm referencing exhibit 4. I'm referencing an affidavit, the witness's affidavit, line 7, so that way everybody's on the same page.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. The defense is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Excellent. Give me just a second. If you hear people in the background, that is because my wife has a presentation this morning and we're all in COVID times doing things together. So I will try to mute myself whenever possible so that that doesn't distract anybody. With that, let's proceed on to opening statements, beginning with the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. A wedding engagement should be the beginning of a new journey for a couple, the beginning of a new founded love, and the beginning of a partnership to last forever. However, for our couple, Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto, it was merely the beginning of the end. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Joshua Kennedy, and today, alongside my co-counsel, Caleb Holland and Yesenia Ireland, we represent the plaintiff, the administrator of the estate of Genesis Petrillo, in today's case. This is Genesis Petrillo ladies and gentlemen of the jury. A young woman with a promising life ahead of her had just met the love of her life and soon-to-be fiance Casey Soto when she met Casey's mother, the defendant in today's case, Harper Martini. Now allow me to take you all back to the night of June 7th, 2019, the night of Genesis's and Casey's rehearsal dinner, and also the night before their wedding day. Everything was going great. Guests were enjoying food and champagne, heartwarming and fun speeches were being made to honor the soon-to-be wed, and everything was going according to plan until Harper Martini made a surprise announcement. The defendant presented everyone at the wedding with a nice bottle of a 2017 Horizon wine, except for the victim. Instead, she gave the victim, in today's case Genesis, a bottle of a 2019 Cara wine that had never been released to the public. Now, the evidence will show today that Genesis began to drink this wine, and as the night continued on, Genesis began to grow more and more ill. Now today, you will hear from 3 witnesses. The first is Angel Rodriguez, who will guide you through the night of the rehearsal dinner and will tell you that afterwards, once Genesis had gotten to bed, she began to vomit profusely and that Angel called 911 and Genesis was rushed to the ER where our second witness, Dr. Kwan, treated her. Now, Dr. Kwan will tell you that Genesis died from respiratory failure that was likely caused by pesticide poisoning. Now, you may be asking yourself at this point, when did Genesis ever ingest pesticides? Well, as it turns out, the bottle of Cara wine that was gifted to Genesis was tested and found to contain a high percentage of pesticides. Not only this, but all other leftover food and beverages were also tested, and other than the Cara wine that Harper gifted to Genesis, nothing tested to have any pesticides or poisons within them. And other than Genesis Petrillo, no one present at the rehearsal dinner suffered any symptoms consistent to that of pesticide poisoning. But why, you may ask yourself, would anyone do such a thing? Well, that brings us to our last witness, the victim's almost bride, Casey Soto. Now, Casey will tell you that Genesis and Harper had a rough relationship from the start. Casey will tell you that Harper took things too far sometimes and involved herself too much within the wedding planning process, and will show you exactly why Harper committed this heinous act. Now, as the plaintiff in today's case, we carry the burden of the proof, which is the preponderance of the evidence, and we gladly accept it. Now, what is the preponderance of the evidence? Basically, imagine a scale. The scales start tipped like this in favor of the defense. Now, we as the plaintiff have to start stacking evidence on the scales until they tip just so slightly in our favor. What this means is that at the end of the trial, you only need to ask yourself one question, and that is it more likely than not that the defendant committed battery? Now, for you to answer yes, we only need to prove that it was more likely than not that Harper intentionally made contact with Genesis without consent, intended to cause harm to Genesis, and cause such harm. Now, by law, this also includes anyone who intentionally introduces an injurious substance like pesticides into a person's food or drink, even if the person voluntarily consumed that food or drink. Now, this brings up an important detail to keep in mind. We do not have to prove that Harper caused the death of Genesis. Whether or not Genesis died of pesticide poisoning or some other manner does not matter. We need only prove that the defendant engaged in an act with intent to cause harm or offensive contact to Genesis Petrillo and that Genesis suffered harm. So remember, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Genesis and Casey were supposed to be beginning a new journey in their lives, but instead, we will prove that the defendant made it merely the beginning of the end. And so we ask that after hearing the testimony today and seeing the evidence, that you come to the only reasonable conclusion in today's case, which is finding the defendant, Harper Martini, liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you. From the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. It's dangerous to assume. On June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo was rushed to Midlands River Valley Hospital, and after a few hours, died. Now, the cause of death was written off as poisoning from a bottle of pesticide, and everyone assumes this to be true. Members of the jury, before you assume this is fact, I'd like to tell you one thing, that it's dangerous to assume. Harper Martini opened Peony Estates Winery in 2015, and with the help of her child, Casey Soto, things couldn't have been better. Sure, they were rough things along the way, but Harper Martini herself will tell you today just how much Casey mattered to her. She'll explain to you how overjoyed she was when Casey announced her engagement to Genesis Petrillo, despite their rocky relationship. And we expect the evidence to show everything that Harper Martini did to try and help get on Genesis Petrillo's good side. Now, just because Harper and Genesis didn't get along, well, might I say again, members of the jury, that it's dangerous to assume. Now, operations at the winery didn't cease altogether while the wedding was being planned. In fact, they encountered their own problems. Austin Lewis is here to tell you about that. He'll tell you everything that had to be done in order to prepare the winery for this wedding. Austin Lewis will tell you about the winery's recurring problem and their solution to it, pesticides. He'll tell you everything that Harper Martini requested of him in order to make sure this wedding went perfect for his Casey, for her Casey. And we expect the evidence to show that empty bottles of pesticide are tossed in the dumpster, as well as empty bottles of wine. Now, an empty bottle of wine testing positive for pesticides because it's been poisoned, might I say again, members of the jury, it's dangerous to assume. Now, June 7th was the night of the rehearsal dinner. Celebration was had by all as it was meant to commemorate the wedding between Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto. Harper Martini presented all the guests there with gifts and a special bottle of wine for Genesis. And then she retired for the night. Later that night, however, Genesis Petrillo was rushed to the hospital. And Dr. Reese Cannon is here to tell you about how Genesis was treated. She'll explain to you all the procedures that the treating physician, Dr. Jimin Kwan, went through in order to diagnose Genesis. And we expect you to hear today that Dr. Kwan did not wait for a confirmation of diagnosis before beginning treatment. Genesis Petrillo died in that hospital. And Dr. Cannon will tell you how Dr. Kwan was very quick to write off pesticide poisoning as the cause of death without assuming that anything else could have caused it. And as I've said many times before, members of the jury, it is dangerous to assume. Now, today, the estate of Genesis Petrillo, the plaintiff, has come against Harper Martini, the defendant, with a charge of battery, claiming that the bottle of wine that Harper so graciously gifted to Genesis had been poisoned with a pesticide. This means that they have to prove battery by a preponderance of the evidence. This means that the plaintiff has to prove to you that Harper Martini acted with intent to harm Genesis Petrillo, that Harper Martini purposefully poisoned this bottle of wine, intending for Genesis to drink it, that Genesis Petrillo did in fact drink this bottle of wine, and that as a result, Genesis Petrillo suffered harm and died. Now, earlier I said they had to prove this by a preponderance of the evidence. This means that they must prove to you that this is true more likely than not. They must prove to you that every single prong of the case that I just listed must be true more likely than not. They must prove to you that the assumption that Genesis Petrillo was purposefully poisoned is true more likely than not. And they won't, members of the jury. because as I've said many times before, it is dangerous to assume. Now, at the end of trial today, my co-counsel, Mr. Dylan McDowell, will come before you and explain to you just what the dangers are of making assumptions. He'll tell you every single assumption that plaintiff has made in today's case. And members of the jury, I ask of you, please hold off on your judgments until you've heard all the facts, because as I've said many times before, and I will remind you again, it is dangerous to assume. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kristen. First witness from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right, and I'll have Ms. Rodriguez and all of the other witnesses who I know are constructively sequestered, but for this moment they are not. Everybody raise their right hand. Everybody promise to play fair? Yes? Then you're all constructively sworn. Mr. Kennedy, when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name for the record?
Yes, I'm Angel Rodriguez.
And could you tell the court a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School here in Midlands. I love teaching, and my babies, they actually made me these bracelets after Genesis passed. They always loved whenever her or Casey would stop by.
I'd actually like to discuss Casey and Genesis with you. Could you describe what your relationship with them was like?
I mean, it really only took us a few drinks to become best friends. I used to joke that we were stuck like glue. They couldn't get rid of me if they wanted to.
How did you react when you heard that the two of them were getting engaged?
I couldn't have been happier. I mean, my only concern was whose maid of honor I was going to be. As soon as they told our group with the wedding planning started, I mean, we basically had it all figured out in one night. Everything was falling into place until Casey's parent, Harper Martini, got involved.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, Harper changed everything. She made them change their venue from Rosie and Pedro to, of course, Peony Estates, and forced them to work with a wedding planner, Blair Osborne, who she hired instead of letting them plan it themselves.
From what you could tell, did it seem like Harper and Genesis got along?
No, not at all.
And why do you say that?
Well, the more time I spent around Harper, the more clear it became that she didn't like anyone too close to Casey.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention towards the night of the rehearsal dinner, June 7th. How were Genesis and Harper that night?
Before the dinner had even started, they were just like two kids who couldn't stop fighting. I mean, the lights, the napkins, the vows, you name it. Harper actually said that Genesis should just disappear and save this family the headache. Otherwise, she would make her disappear.
No, did Harper do anything out of the ordinary before the dinner started?
Well, there was one thing that just sounded like typical Harper at the time, but ever since Genesis died, I haven't been able to shake it. I saw Harper carrying a canister with the word pesticide on it. And when I asked what was going on, later when I saw Genesis, or no, actually, I'm sorry. When I saw Harper, she said, it's for Genesis because she's such a pest.
Now, when the dinner actually started, what were things like then?
When it came time for speeches, Casey went first and then Genesis right after. I don't remember everything Genesis said, but the crowd loved it. I mean, she was always so charismatic, never said a bad thing about anyone, including Harper.
Did Harper give a speech?
Of course she did, but instead of celebrating the happy couple, she used her time to mock Genesis, repeatedly calling her a problem child. It really wasn't funny or lighthearted at all. I mean, my kindergartners behaved better. I could literally feel Genesis shaking under the table.
Now, did Harper do anything else out of the ordinary during the dinner?
Yes, later in the evening, Harper surprised everyone by toasting Genesis. She gave her this extra fancy bottle of Cara wine and then gave the rest of the members of the wedding party a different wine from Peony Estates.
Would you recognize this bottle that she gave to Genesis if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to display what has already been pre-admitted as Exhibits 2A and 2B.
You may.
Angel, is this the bottle you saw that evening?
Yes, and 2B is the label that was on it.
Oh, did Genesis offer anyone at the table a drink from it?
She offered it to everyone, but I was the only one to accept. I put it down after a small sip, though, because I didn't like how it tasted. I'm more of a vodka girl myself.
No, did you see Genesis drink this wine?
Yes, I did.
And did you see anyone else have a drink from this bottle of wine?
No, I didn't.
Now, can you tell the court about the hour following this toast?
I drank 1 or 2 cocktails from the bar while Genesis drank several glasses of the wine from Harper, which isn't unusual. I mean, I've seen Genesis drink more than that many times, but around 11, Genesis got up to dance, and it was just clear that something was very wrong.
And why do you say that?
I've never seen her out of it like that before. She was stumbling and slurring her words, and it just didn't add up to how much I'd actually seen Genesis drink. I tried to convince her to go to bed, but she didn't want to.
Now, did Genesis ever give in and go to bed?
Eventually, yes. Sometime after midnight, I had looked over and saw Genesis had slumped over in her chair and was snoring. So I decided I needed to get her to bed then. But the strange part was that despite how she looked, I didn't smell alcohol on her breath.
Now, when you were able to get Genesis back up to her room, was everything okay then?
No, immediately after getting her to the room, poor thing started sweating and vomiting. She was just getting so sick so quickly. And the last thing she said to me before passing out was 911. So I called immediately.
Now, when the EMTs arrived, did you go with Genesis to the hospital?
Yes, I rode with her, but everything just happened so fast. I don't remember what everyone was saying.
Angel, I know this may be tough for you, but could you describe what your experience was like while you were at the hospital?
Um, I waited at the hospital all night. I I tried to get a hold of Genesis's family, but no one would answer. I didn't call Casey because I was hoping everything was going to be okay by the time of the wedding. But then around 8 a.m., the doctors informed me that Genesis was in a coma, likely due to some sort of poisoning.
Now, what did you do after you found out she had slipped into a coma?
I knew then that Casey needed to know, so I got a ride all the way back to Peony Estates.
Did you run into anyone on your way to tell Casey?
Yes, I ran into Harper actually, and before I could even get a word out, she said, Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding. Go tell Casey, she needs to know.
Now, to your knowledge, did anyone other than yourself and the doctor know that Genesis had fallen into a coma?
No, not that I know of.
Now, once you finally made it to Casey's room, what did you do then?
Having to tell Casey was the second most heartbreaking moment of my life. I mean, we rushed right to the hospital, but as soon as we got to the floor where Genesis was being treated, the doctors told Casey that she had died, and that was the first. I mean, I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner.
What do you mean by that?
Well, before the rehearsal dinner, I saw Harper grab Genesis's arm and pull her into a hallway. And afterwards, when I saw Genesis, she told me to keep away from Harper because I'm afraid that Harper is going to kill me if I'm not careful.
Now, after she said, I'm afraid that Harper is going to kill me if I'm not careful, did you think she was joking?
Well, at first I did, but Genesis didn't even smile. It was clear that she was extremely scared of Harper by the end of the rehearsal.
And what reasons do you have to believe that Harper actually poisoned Genesis?
It just makes sense. One, Harper's the one I saw with pesticides. Two, Harper's one who gave that wine to Genesis. And three, Harper made Genesis fear for her life. One of my 5-year-olds would believe it.
Now, how have you been holding up since Genesis's passing?
It's been really hard to lose my best friend and to see my other best friend lose the love of her life, but I couldn't just sit on all my sadness. So outside of school, I've spent all my free time advocating for Genesis. It's what she would have wanted.
I'm sure she'd appreciate that. Thank you for your time here today. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Cross-examination from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin? Ms. Rodriguez, I would like to direct your attention to the wedding rehearsal on the night of June 7th, 2019. And during this rehearsal, you sat next to Genesis.
Yeah, I did.
And you were present at 10 p.m. when Harper made her toast, correct?
I was there. Like I said, it surprised everyone. You didn't expect it.
And after Harper's toast, she handed out gifts that were bottles of wine to the wedding party.
Yes, but Genesis got a different wine than everyone else at the wedding party, the Cara wine.
And the rest of the wedding party received the Horizon.
Yes, the Horizon.
And after Genesis received this bottle of wine, she poured a glass of this wine.
Yeah, she did.
And then she offered you a glass of this wine.
Yes, she did.
And you took a sip of this wine.
I did, but like I said, I spit it out. I'm not a wine girl.
And after this, Genesis finished that first glass of wine, correct?
Yeah, something like that.
And Genesis had several glasses of that wine afterwards.
Yes, but like I said, Genesis loved her wine, so it's normal for her to drink several glasses.
And at about 11 p.m., you noticed that Genesis was slurring her words.
Yes, yeah, it didn't make sense because, like I said, I've seen Genesis drink more than that, and she sounds just like she normally does.
And after you noticed that Genesis's coordination was off.
Yeah, she was almost falling over. I mean, I thought I was going to have to hold her up the rest of the night.
And you were worried about her?
Yes, of course I was.
And because you were concerned about her, you offered to help her upstairs?
Yeah, she had a wedding the next day. I mean, I thought it was just time for her to go to sleep, maybe.
And Genesis told you no at your first attempt to get her upstairs?
She is the life of the party. She does not like to go to sleep, so that was no surprise to me.
And then around midnight, she ordered some shots of tequila?
Yeah, she did.
And then a little bit afterwards, you noticed that she was slumped over at the bar.
It was, but I didn't see her drink the tequila shots. Just me and my friend Drew are the only ones I know for sure that had them.
So after that, you took Genesis upstairs, correct?
Yes, when I saw her sleeping, I figured it's time to go to bed.
And once Genesis was back in her room, she began to throw up?
She did almost immediately. She couldn't even keep water down without throwing it up, which I've never seen her do like that before.
And then Genesis passed out?
Yes, she did.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. I have no further questions.
Redirect from Mr. Kennedy.
I have no redirect at this time, Your Honor. We just ask that the witness be excused.
Any objection to that, Ms. Yates?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Rodriguez, you are excused with thanks to the court.
Thank you.
Additional witnesses from the plaintiff. Well, actually, hang on for just a second. How are my scoring judges doing? Do you guys need any more time?
No, Judge, I'm ready to move on.
All right. With that, any additional witnesses from the plaintiff?
The plaintiff calls Dr. Kwan to the stand.
Dr. Kwan, you've already been constructively sworn. So, Ms. Ireland, whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Pip pip cheerio, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
And Dr. Kwan, what is your educational background in?
Yes, I received my Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Afterwards, I received my medical degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
And what did you do exactly after graduation?
Well, I completed my residency and my fellowship at Emory's Department of Emergency Medicine, specifically in medical toxicology. Afterwards, I've worked as a doctor ever since, up to my position now as Chief Emergency Physician at River Valley Hospital.
And what do you do as the Chief Physician at the River Valley Hospital?
Well, I do a variety of things. First and foremost, I overlook the doctors and nurses who work under me. Aside from that, I am in charge of ordering tests, making diagnoses, treating patients, things of that nature.
What sorts of principles and methods did you use in reviewing today's case?
Yes, so I did a variety of things. First of all, I compiled my report based on what I saw the night of June 8th. In addition to that, I examined Patria Miss Patria, when she came into the hospital. I ran any necessary tests and things like that.
What did you exactly do for Miss Patria's examination?
Well, just your standard things. I examined her systems. I looked to see what symptoms she was exhibiting, and I used all of this information to go ahead and make my conclusions and my diagnoses.
Are these principles and methods widely accepted in your field?
Of course.
What sort of things did you do to review for today's case?
Well, like I said, I compiled my report, but for today, I reviewed my report. I overlooked the test results that I ordered, things like that.
Did you apply these principles and methods reliably?
Yes, I did.
Did you believe your testimony will help the jury understand the facts of today's case?
I do.
And how did you become involved in today's case?
Well, I was the treating physician of Miss Genesis Petrillo.
And Dr. Kwan, besides working as an emergency physician at the River Valley Hospital, is there any other organizations or activities you do outside of work?
Yes, so in addition to my work as a doctor, I'm actually a member on the board of directors of Doctors for Organic Solutions. We're an organization that actually advocates against the use of chemical pesticides.
Will this affect your report and analysis for today's case?
Oh, no, of course not. Everything is completely objective in my work. I'm a doctor first and foremost, after all.
Now, to move along, can you explain your first encounter with Ms. Petrillo?
Yes, so when Ms. Petrillo arrived at the hospital, I actually thought that this was going to be an alcohol poisoning case. This was due to the variety of symptoms that she was exhibiting. They were mostly consistent with alcohol poisoning. However, there were a few symptoms that stood out to me in particular that led me to believe it could actually be something else.
What are the symptoms that pointed out to you?
Yes, so her pupils were dilated, first of all. She was also experiencing something called bronchospasms, which isn't quite consistent with a typical alcohol poisoning case.
And since you noticed these abnormal symptoms, did you run any additional tests or labs?
Yes, so when Ms. Petrillo actually arrived at the hospital to begin with, we did take a sample of her vomit and we sent that out for testing. In addition to this, I ordered a test for her blood to see if the lab analysts would be able to look for something called acetylcholinesterase.
Can you explain to us what acetylcholinesterase to us? We just don't know.
Yes, so acetylcholinesterase is something, it's an enzyme that is created when you have been exposed to something called an organophosphate. An organophosphate is something that is commonly found in things like insecticides or pesticides.
And how can one determine if a person has been poisoned by an organophosphate?
Yes, so in the blood test that I asked for the lab analysts to run, they're able to look for acetylcholinesterase. While acetylcholinesterase does not necessarily tell you the severity of the exposure, it does tell you if someone has been exposed and how far along they may be in their symptoms.
You mentioned a blood lab test. Do you remember receiving those results?
I do.
Would you be able to recognize them if I showed them here today?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to display pre-admitted Exhibit 5 on the screen?
You may.
Dr. Kwan, what is that you're seeing on the screen?
These are the results from the blood test that I ordered.
Are you familiar with the exhibit?
I am.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Is this a fair and accurate copy of the exhibit?
Yes.
Do you believe this will be helpful for your supporting your testimony here today?
I do.
Can you explain us, Dr. Kwan, exactly what we see on the screen?
Yes, so like I said, these are the results from the blood test that I asked to be run.
And can you explain to us, because not an average individual would not know the actual results, what they mean? What does the poison and toxins analysis actually mean?
Yes, so if you'll notice around the middle of the page, it says acetylcholinesterase. You'll notice that there are actually low levels of acetylcholinesterase that were found in Ms. Petrio's system. This is important because low levels of acetylcholinesterase are generally indicative of organophosphate poisoning. These results would let doctors like myself go ahead and conclusively diagnose Ms. Petrio with this type of poisoning.
Dr. Kwan, besides ingestion of an organophosphate, is there any other ways a human might be poisoned or come in contact with an organophosphate?
So there are.
Sorry, Your Honor, permission to display a demonstrative?
You may.
Go ahead, Dr. Kwan.
Yes, so if you'll notice on the screen, there are actually a few different ways that someone can become poisoned by an organophosphate. First of all, there's inhalation. This is if there's some trace of organophosphate in the air and you're able to inhale it. Next, there's skin absorption if you somehow touch it or come in contact with it. And finally, there's orally, which would be much like today's case, if you ingested an organophosphate.
You mentioned inhalation and skin absorption. Why were these possibilities ruled out?
Yes, so I was able to rule them out for a few different reasons. First of all, the symptoms that presented themselves in Ms. Petrio did not present themselves in a manner that were consistent with either inhalation or skin absorption. Additionally, there was no evidence of a rash or anything that would indicate that she had come in contact with an organophosphate. As such, I felt that the most likely possibility here was that she had somehow ingested an organophosphate.
And after you came to the conclusion she might have ingested an organophosphate, what did you do after that?
Yes, so I did what any doctor would do. I acted promptly in order to go ahead and treat Ms. Petrio. At this point, it was clear that she was in the more severe area of this poisoning. I began administering an antidote, but unfortunately it was too late and she passed away not too long afterwards.
After reviewing, what did you determine the facts of the case that led to the death of Ms. Petrio?
Well, yes, after reviewing everything, what I found to be the most likely case, I can say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Ms. Petrio died as a result of respiratory failure caused by an organophosphate poison.
I pass the witness, Your Honor, and as well at this time, Your Honor, I ask to preserve the demonstrative.
We'll preserve it. If the defense intends to use it, all you need to do is ask. Any cross-examination from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Go right ahead, Mr. Christian.
Dr. Kwan, you said on direct that you are on the board of directors for an organization against pesticides. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And you think pesticides are a scourge to the environment?
Yes, they present a needless and risk to humans, in my opinion.
And you hope that the outcome of today's case will influence legislation in the future?
Yes, it's very unfortunate what happened, and I hope that this can serve as an example of the dangers of chemical pesticides.
All right. Well, Dr. Kwan, when a Genesis Petrio was admitted to the emergency room, they did exhibit symptoms of alcohol poisoning, yes?
Yes, they did.
That would include smelling of alcohol, correct?
Yes, she appeared to be intoxicated.
But Genesis Petrillo smelled of alcohol?
Yes.
All right. And despite admitting Genesis Petrillo for alcohol poisoning, you didn't order a blood test immediately?
No, I did not. It's not necessarily common to do that. I didn't feel it was necessary at the moment.
All right. I'd actually like to talk about the tests that you ordered, if that's all right. There is actually no way for your toxins analysis in order to detect organophosphate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In fact, it only detects the enzyme acetylcholinesterase.
Yes, which is a byproduct of organophosphate poisons.
But there are other ways medically that acetylcholinesterase can be lowered.
I suppose. So,
all right. Yes?
Oh, well, so the way that acetylcholinesterase works, right? It's an enzyme that's created by organophosphates, so it's not necessarily always present in the body.
All right. And you said that there were different ways that a person can become poisoned.
Yes, correct.
And you quickly ruled out 2 of the ways.
I did.
And you're familiar with the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez?
I am.
And you know that Angel Rodriguez took a sip of this wine.
Yes. I believe she spit it out, but she yes.
But would you not agree that this would have constituted skin contact?
I suppose.
Is there any way that you could reliably explain why Angel Rodriguez did not suffer from poisoning as well?
Well, off the top of my head, I don't know how much contact she had. Organophosphate poisoning is very dangerous, but I wouldn't be able to tell you as I don't know exactly what happened. I only know what happened based on what she wrote in her affidavit.
All right. And you said that you did order a blood test. In fact, this blood test was ordered at 02:58.
Correct.
And at the time, Mrs. Petrillo's BAC was 0.16.
Correct.
And you said before that you were familiar with the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
Yes.
So you know that Genesis Petrillo stopped drinking after 0042.
After what time? I'm sorry.
That would be 12:42.
Oh, yes.
And the blood alcohol content would have spiked after that.
There would have been a peak BAC at some point, but I wouldn't be able to tell you when or what it was.
Right. You don't know what Genesis Petrillo's peak BAC would be.
No, I don't.
And you also ordered a test on Genesis Petrillo's stomach contents.
I did.
And you said there was no other toxin other than the wine.
In her stomach contents?
Yes.
Well, there were traces of organophosphate poisoning.
Yes, but you said that the primary intoxicated material was the wine.
Yes, the wine that had traces of organophosphate poison.
But the stomach mixes its contents, does it not?
Correct.
So if there was any other toxin, it would make uncontaminated wine appear contaminated.
I suppose, but the way that the stomach contents was, when we examined it, I believe it would be very unlikely that they had been consumed at different times.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, I have no further questions.
Redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked my witness to be excused.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Yes. All right. Dr. Kwan, you are excused with the thanks of the court. Further witnesses from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Casey Soto.
Ms. Soto, you have also been constructively sworn. So, Mr. Holland, whenever you're ready.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yeah, I'm Casey Soto.
And why are you here in court today?
Well, because my fiance Genesis passed away.
I know that dealing with that has been very hard for you, Casey. Could you tell us who Genesis Petrillo was?
She was my everything. She was my fiance. She was my best friend. We did everything together.
Your Honor, permission to display pre-admitted exhibits 1.
You may.
Ms. Soto, do you see this on your screen?
Yes, I do.
Could you say who this is on your screen?
Yeah, that's Genesis.
And when did you and Ms. Petrillo meet?
We had met in like May of 2012. We had met at like a party for my friend Drew, and she caught my eye.
So you two met at a party, and when did you two start dating?
Not long after that, to be honest. We had exchanged numbers, and then we had our first date, and then we made it official about a month later.
I know seeing that picture can be hard for you, so I'll move forward from it. How well did Genesis get along with people?
Gosh, Genesis got along with everybody. She was such a people person. She got
Objection, Your Honor. Your Honor, may I be heard?
Go ahead.
Objection, Your Honor, on the grounds of speculation to Genesis got along with everybody.
Response?
Your Honor, considering that Casey Soto is the fiance of Genesis Petrillo, he doesn't have to speculate if Genesis got along with people that well.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, Your Honor, speculation is going to the fact that Casey is saying that Genesis got along with everybody well. Your Honor, Casey would not know all of Genesis's interactions with people and could not attest to exactly how Genesis got along with people that Casey has no knowledge of, Your Honor. And for Casey to try to state that Genesis got along with everyone, not knowing all of Genesis's interactions, would be going towards speculation in this case, Your Honor.
Mr. McDowell, can you point me to the rule of evidence within the Midlands rules that you're relying on?
Yes, Your Honor. It would go on the grounds of Rule 602, which would be a lack of personal knowledge in this case, Your Honor, because again, Casey, there's been no foundation laid as to how Casey would know all of Genesis's interactions and how Genesis would be acting within these interactions with other people.
Response, Mr. Holland. Final word.
Your Honor, I didn't ask how well Genesis got along with all people. I'm asking Casey from her own rationally based perception, how well did Casey witness Genesis get along with people from what Casey saw?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is speculative because we're not talking about someone who doesn't have a good basis of information or knowledge about the decedent. We're talking about her fiance. And so I think that she would have personal knowledge of the way in which the decedent reacted and interacted with people around them. I understand your point. I'm sorry, defense attorney's name.
Mr. McDowell.
Mr. McDowell. I understand your point, Mr. McDowell. I think it goes to weight, not admissibility. I think it's something you can cross on if you choose to do so. But I also think that I think that the jury will understand that certainly no one can know the entirety of another person's interactions. But I do think based on the nature of this relationship, Ms. Soto is not speculating. She has personal knowledge of the way in which the decedent interacted with others. So I'm going to overrule your objection. Mr. Holland, you can go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll ask you that again, Ms. Soto. How well did Ms. Petrillo get along with people?
She got along with everybody. I saw her interact with everyone except for my mom, Harper.
And when did Ms. Petrillo and the defendant begin to not get along?
It started when they first met. I had brought them to a dinner at Harper's house, and Genesis had made a comment about the wine that Harper was serving, not realizing that it was from her winery, Peony Estates. And of course, Harper took offense to it and just held it against Genesis ever since.
Ms. Soto, could you further explain what you mean by held it against Genesis?
Of course, Harper just would complain that Genesis didn't respect her, didn't respect her business, didn't respect her hard work. It was just a whole issue.
And did the issue between the two of them impact your relationship with Genesis?
Absolutely not. I love Genesis. I still love Genesis, and I would never let anything come between us, especially my own parent.
Now, moving further, when did you and Genesis decide to get married?
Genesis she had actually proposed to me when I was going to do it first, back in I want to say July of 2018.
And what were your plans for the wedding?
We had planned on having it at Rosie and Pedro winery, but my mom asked us to change it to Peony Estates.
And did the defendant give a reason for wanting it at Peony Estates?
Yeah, my mom had always dreamed of me having my wedding at her own winery, aka Peony Estates, and that she wanted to use my wedding photos for advertising and just all those little business things.
And did Ms. Petrillo ever give any thoughts about changing the location?
Well, at first we were both apprehensive about it, but Harper said that if we did change venues, that she would pay for a large portion of it. And well, me and Genesis were planning to move to France, so that was going to save us like a lot of money.
Now, after all the wedding planning had concluded, what was the wedding rehearsal like?
Oh gosh, it was just drama and drama and more drama. Genesis and Harper were just at each other's throats.
And did that have any effect on you?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? My computer was acting wonky.
I'll repeat that. Did them being at each other's throats have an effect on you?
Yeah, at one point I almost wanted to cancel the wedding, but Genesis, with her kind soul, convinced me that it was just for us, and that we needed to have our moment. So we continued with it.
Did you express your want to cancel the wedding with anyone else?
Yes, I had actually told my mom, Harper, and at first she was ecstatic about it for some reason, but yeah.
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis?
Objection again, Your Honor, to speculation. As Casey Soto said, Harper was ecstatic.
Response?
Your Honor, considering that the defendant was Casey's mother, and also the defendant openly expressed that that's not entering the state of mind of the defendant told Casey that they were ecstatic about the news.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Briefly, yes, Mr. McDowell.
Your Honor, the elicited testimony that was given by Casey Soto was that Harper was ecstatic about it. There was no foundation as to whether or not it was said by Harper Martini or whether or not this was thought of. And for that reason, Your Honor, ecstatic is still an emotional mindset. And as Casey Soto is not Harper Martini, Casey cannot attest to the mindset or the emotional mindset of Harper Martini, only to what was seen and what was heard. And therefore, Your Honor, since there was no foundation as to whether or not this was stated as Harper was ecstatic, this is going to the emotional mindset.
Again, I disagree with you, Mr. McDowell. I think that we, as human beings, interpret other people's mindsets all the time. And testifying as such is not speculation if you have personal knowledge to base that rationally based late perception on. And in this case, like for example, right now I can tell that you're not happy with me because I'm going to rule against you. That doesn't mean I'm speculating because I'm watching you as you interact with me. I think we get into speculation when it's evident that there is no possible way without further foundation that the witness could have personal knowledge of a condition or of a particular fact. I think in this case, since these two people are face to face, I understand what you're saying, that you can't get inside someone else's head. I think that's always true, but we interpret other people's emotions all the time. That's not the same thing as speculation if you have the basis by which to make that interpretation. So I'm going to again overrule your objection, and Mr. Holland, you can go ahead.
Yes. I'll just ask you one last question, Casey, Ms. Soto. What was your reaction when you found out Ms. Petrillo died?
I was honestly so confused. I had ate and drank everything Genesis had that night. And so to think that she passed away from something that could have been served is just insane to me. I had everything except that wine.
No further questions, Your Honor. We pass the witness.
Sorry about that. Mr. Holland, did you indicate that you were going to pass the witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, it does look like we're at time. That was the plaintiff timekeeper indicating that we were at time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody was in agreement there. All right, so with that, cross-examination from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Now, Ms. Soto, you are the daughter of Harper Martini,
Yes,
and you are the former spouse of Genesis Petrillo.
I wouldn't say former, but yes.
Now, Ms. Soto, you are not testifying voluntarily today.
No, this is the last place I want to be.
In fact, you were actually subpoenaed to testify in today's case.
That is true, because once again, this is not something I want to be doing.
Now, Ms. Soto, Genesis actually proposed to you in 2018.
Yes, that is correct.
And y'all originally planned to have your wedding at the Rosie and Pedro Winery.
Yes, we did.
However, y'all ultimately changed the venue to Harper's Winery.
Yeah, because Harper really wanted us to.
Now, as you stated in your direct, you were aware that Harper and Genesis did not get along.
Of course, it was my mom and my fiance.
In fact, you even came across a voicemail that Genesis had sent to Harper.
Yes, I do recall that voicemail.
And you would recognize this voicemail if I were to show it to you today.
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm now approaching opposing counsel with what has previously been marked as Exhibit 8 or Exhibit H. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Soto, I am now handing you what has previously been marked as Exhibit 8. Do you recognize Exhibit 8 or H in this case?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize this exhibit to be?
It's the voicemail that Genesis had left my mom.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the voicemail that Genesis had left to your mom?
Yeah, I would say so, yes.
And has this voicemail that Genesis sent to your mom been changed or altered in any way?
I don't think so.
Your Honor, at this time, per stipulation 3, exhibits 1 through 10 have already been pre-admitted into evidence.
I'm assuming there's no objection here, Mr. Holland?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Again, just to kind of clarify the record, that what has been previously marked Exhibit 8 will be admitted as defenses. I'm going to call it A, Mr. McDowell.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. I was struggling with the classification on that. Thank you, Your Honor.
So Exhibit A is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Soto, in this voicemail, Genesis stated that you don't deserve us.
Yeah, she did.
Genesis also stated that you will die alone.
Yeah, but she was just angry and drunk.
So that is a yes to my question. Genesis stated that you will die alone.
Yes.
And Genesis also stated that, and no one will care.
Yes, she did.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. Your Honor, may I approach the witness to retrieve Exhibit A and publish it to the jury?
It's already been published.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, I would like to direct your attention to the night of June 7th, 2019. Ms. Soto, this was the evening of the wedding rehearsal.
Yes, it was.
And during this wedding rehearsal, Harper Martini gave a toast
Yep.
and also presented a bottle of wine to Genesis.
Yeah, it was the Carl wine.
In fact, you believe that Harper's notion sounded sincere.
Of course. I mean, it was my mom. So in that moment, I thought it was all just a gift.
Now, you saw Genesis pour a couple of glasses that night.
Yeah, I did, but I'm not sure if she drank them or if they were both for her or someone else.
Exactly. You did not see Genesis drink any of that wine that night.
Not that I can remember.
Now, Ms. Soto, you actually went to sleep fairly early that night.
yeah, everything that had happened that day, I was just so exhausted and wanted to be happy for the wedding.
So, Miss Soto, you cannot attest to everything that Genesis had to eat for the rest of that night.
Well, we ate mostly everything except we ate and drank literally everything except that wine.
But Miss Soto, you cannot attest to everything that Genesis had eaten the rest of that night, correct?
I guess after I went to bed, no, I can't.
Nor how much Genesis had eaten for the rest of the night.
Nope, or how much she drank either.
That's right. You cannot attest to how much Genesis had drank for the rest of that night.
No, I cannot.
Nor what Genesis actually drank for the rest of that night.
Except the Cara.
But Miss Soto, back to my question, you cannot attest to what Genesis had drank for the rest of that night.
No, not after I went to bed.
Now, Miss Soto, you were never asked to poison this bottle of Cara wine. Can you hear me, Miss Soto?
Yeah.
Oh,
Can you repeat that? My computer's being weird.
yes, Miss Soto, no problem. Now, you were never asked to poison this bottle of Cara wine.
No, that's a crazy question.
And you never saw Harper Martini poison this bottle of Cara wine.
No, once again, that's a crazy question. No.
So again, Miss Soto, that is a no to my question that you never saw Harper Martini poison this bottle of Cara wine.
No.
Thank you. Thank you. At this time, Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
Redirect, Mr. Holland.
No redirect, Your Honor. At this time, we ask that this witness be excused because this is very intense for her.
Any objection, Mr. McDowell?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Soto, you are excused with thanks to the court. Anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor, we rest our case.
All right, how are we doing on time from our timekeepers?
Let me check with my co-counsel.
Please do.
We agree on all the times, Your Honor. I do have one question about the all time. I sent you a direct message.
Yes, what's the
All
question?
loss, I'm sorry.
I don't know. I have.
I believe all loss is at 12:55.
Huh?
I actually don't think that's correct. All loss is 2.5 hours after we start, and I think we started around like 11:15 or something. So we should still have another hour. Oh wait, I'm not 11:15, like 10:15. I'm on the East Coast.
According to captain's meeting, 12:55 Central Time is all loss.
So for us, it's 1:55.
And to clarify, what would that be for Eastern Time?
1:55.
Okay.
All right, so it sounds like then, if I'm getting this correct, that all lost time is going to be 12:55 Central Standard Time, which for me here in Mountain Time would be 11:55. So I show that we have an hour and 25 minutes left. Does everybody agree on that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Great. Okay. So let's take a quick break. Let's call it 5 minutes. Be back here at, I'm just going to use Central Standard Time because I think that's what the tournament's running on. Let's be back here at 40.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, before we break, I'd like to ask your notation for all exhibits that are currently published, just to get it straight for both parties.
No, I think that's a good question. Let's take the break and then let's figure that out when we come back.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, it's 40. We're back on the record, and I need all parties back and ready to proceed.
Your Honor, plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Defense ready as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's take a quick second because I know that we're short on time to clear up this evidence issue that I think I've probably created. Let me ask the defense this. Do you intend to admit any evidence outside of 1 through 10 that's basically already admitted?
We intend to admit evidence outside of 1 through 10, Your Honor, but I do not believe that it is currently admitted.
Okay. So then let's just do it this way to make things easier. Let's just call, and I guess let me ask the parties this. I think we only saw exhibits 2A and 2B from the plaintiff. Now, there may have been one other that was actually displayed.
I believe we saw Exhibit 5 as well.
That's right.
As well as one, Your Honor.
Does everybody agree then that 1 through 10 is in evidence, even if we didn't necessarily see it?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's just call those 1 through 10. And then let's just keep the exhibits as they are numbered. The exhibits ended up getting introduced a little differently than I am used to. That's not your issue, it's my issue. And so there's no reason to complicate this anymore. We'll just leave it at that.
All right. Yes, Your Honor.
Does that answer everybody's question about evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. So the defense will be going by numbers now instead of the original A through B.
Yeah, we're just going to go through and we're going to rely on the way that things are numbered. And there's no reason to complicate things more than that. So what you introduced as the voicemail transcript, we will still consider exhibit number 8. And we'll leave it at that. Any other housekeeping issues before we get started? Hearing nothing, we're going to get back on the record. Let me make sure that my co-judges are with us.
Yes, I believe we're both here.
Mr. Cooper, are you there? I think he said yes. I saw him unmute, so I'm going to assume that he's there. Obviously, more important that they're here than anybody else because they're the ones that get to make the call. All right, with that, are there any witnesses from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense would like to call its first witness, Harper Martini, to the stand.
Ms. Martini. Ms. Martini, you've also been constructively sworn, so Mr. McDowell, whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Harper Martini.
Now, Ms. Martini, what exactly do you do for a living?
I run a winery and I handle all the managerial side of things.
Well, how did you get into the business of running a winery?
I actually grew up in it at my family's successful winery in Napa Valley. After graduating college, I went on 10-year international travel working at different wineries. That's actually how I met the love of my life, my husband, Peony. And then the first official job I had in the wine industry was my junior year of college at Cumberland's Farm.
Now, how long did you end up working at Cumberland's Farm Winery?
I worked there my last 2 years of college, junior and senior. And then I went back once I got done with my international travels for about 5 years. And then I officially left in 2005.
And Ms. Martini, why exactly did you leave Cumberland's Farm Winery in 2005?
Unfortunately, Peony passed away shortly after we got married. And so that left me to raise our daughter, Casey, alone. I mean, Casey is my world, but single motherhood is hard. So after I saved up enough money, I left the winery in order to take care of Casey until she went off to school.
And when exactly did you get back into the winemaking business?
I went back to my other passion in the winery once Casey went off to school. I was hired as a cellar hand for Danny Francasio at the Rosie and Pedro Winery.
And Miss Martini, how long did you end up working for Danny Francasio at the Rosie and Pedro Winery?
I was there for a few years before I got promoted to vineyard manager in 2014, June, I think. But I officially resigned in January of 2015.
Now, Miss Martini, why did you end up resigning from the Rosie and Pedro Winery in 2015?
That is when I got my startup loan from the bank, and I decided it was time to open up the winery that Peony and I had always dreamed about.
Now, Miss Martini, what is the name of this winery that you decided to open up?
Well, since it was supposed to be our winery and Peony wasn't there in person anymore, I decided to name it after him, so it's called Peony Estates.
Now, Miss Martini, what exactly does Peony Estates do as a winery?
Aside from making wine, we have done wine tastings, weddings, and we even have a bed and breakfast option, which was Casey's idea, actually.
Now, Miss Martini, you've brought up your daughter, Casey, a good bit now. I would like to ask you, Miss Martini, what exactly is your relationship like with your daughter, Casey?
Casey is my everything. I would do anything to make sure that Casey was happy. Sure, we've had our disagreements, but I love her more than anything.
Miss Martini, what exactly do you mean when you said that you and Casey have had y'all's disagreements?
I thought Casey and I pretty much saw eye to eye on most things until Genesis Petrillo walked into her life. That's when we started disagreeing on whether or not Genesis was a good person for Casey.
Now, Miss Martini, who exactly was Genesis Petrillo?
She was Casey's fiance. Genesis and I never really got along. It's been a pain in my side since Casey and Genesis became friends, but nothing mattered more to me than making sure that Casey had the perfect wedding day.
Well, Miss Martini, how bad did things get between you and Genesis Petrillo?
I mean, there was this one point where we just weren't even on speaking terms, and then I just got this weird and hurtful voicemail. Hurt me a lot.
And Miss Martini, would you recognize this voicemail if I were to show it to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, may I retrieve Exhibit 8 from the jury?
You may, and you have permission to publish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Miss Martini, I've handed you what has previously been marked as Exhibit 8. Do you recognize Exhibit 8?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize this exhibit to be?
The voicemail I just mentioned.
And has this voicemail been changed or altered in any way?
No, it has not.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of that voicemail?
Yes.
Now, Miss Martini, what exactly did Genesis state within this voicemail?
Genesis basically told me how much that her and Casey both hated me, how much my own child hated me, and that they were going to leave me for France and never come back, and that I would never get to meet any of my grandchildren. Genesis also said that I would die alone.
Well, Miss Martini, how exactly did that make you feel?
It broke my heart to hear that I would never get to see Casey again. And despite how much I was hurting, I knew that I had to find some way, some magic here, I guess, to bury the hatchet between me and Genesis for Casey's sake.
So, Miss Martini, what exactly did you try to do in order to bury this hatchet with Genesis?
I got a special bottle of wine that I had actually sampled about a month earlier, sealed and closed it. It was this complex blend, and I noticed Genesis enjoying a complex taste at a different wine tasting. So I decided to give her that bottle.
And Miss Martini, what was the name of this bottle that you ended up giving to Genesis?
It was called Cara. Casey actually gave it its name.
Now, why exactly did you believe that this blend of Carl wine was good?
So wine means a lot to me and my family. You know, I grew up in it. Giving Genesis that bottle was symbolic of her joining the family. And that because the wine was named after Casey, it symbolized that no matter what our differences, we both of us wanted what was best for Casey.
Now, Miss Martini, did you poison this bottle of Cara wine that you gave to Genesis Petrillo?
Objection, Your Honor. As we have moved on from the line of questioning regarding the voicemail, I would ask that the exhibit be taken down from screen share at this time.
And I'll sustain that.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Now, did you poison this bottle of Cara wine that you gave to Genesis Petrillo?
No. As much as I hated Genesis, that's undeniable. I loved Casey so much more. And I could never hurt her like that. I could never put my own daughter through that kind of pain.
Your Honor, at this time, I have no further questions for this witness and tender them for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. McDowell. Cross-examination from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may. Well, hang on just a second. Let me make sure my co-judges are good with that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, we're good to proceed.
Let's do it then.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Martini. I'd like to start by talking about your relationship with the victim, Genesis. Now, you and her didn't get along that well, correct?
No, we did not.
She was actually your daughter's fiance.
That's correct.
And it was in 2018 when Casey and Genesis broke the news of their engagement to you, right?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
So in 2018 is when Casey and Genesis told you that they were getting engaged.
Well, they were engaged. That's when they broke the news. Yes.
And this is when you began getting involved with the wedding planning process.
Yes.
And throughout this process, you disagreed with Genesis on many things about the wedding.
Yes.
In fact, the two of you argued quite a bit about the wedding.
Yes, we both had different ideas of what we wanted.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to the night of the rehearsal dinner, which was on June 7th. You stated that Genesis arrived 15 minutes late that day, right?
Yes, she did.
And this upset you very much.
Just a bit, yes.
And you say you had a plan to make a peace with Genesis, though.
Yes, I wanted to bury the hatchet for Casey's sake.
And this burying the hatchet was that you had bottled her a fancy wine.
Yes, I gave Genesis a separate bottle of wine, and everybody else in the wedding party got a separate brand.
And you bottled that specific wine, the Cara wine, about a month or so before the wedding.
Yes, I did.
I'd actually like to look at something that happened a month or so before the wedding as well. Do you recall Genesis leaving you a voicemail on May 12th around 1 a.m.?
Yes, I could never forget that.
And in this voicemail, this is actually when you learned about Genesis's plan to take Casey and move to France.
Yes.
This is also when you were informed that you would never get to meet your grandchildren.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, yes, that's correct.
And this voicemail upset you greatly.
This voicemail, what?
This voicemail upset you greatly.
Yes, it really hurt my feelings.
In fact, after hearing it, you wanted nothing more than to stop the wedding.
Yes, I did.
Now, back to the wine that you prepared a month or so before the wedding. When you prepared this wine, you fully knew that pesticides in wine were unable to be seen with the naked eye.
Yes, I knew that.
And when you prepared this wine, you also fully knew that somebody drinking wine with pesticides in it would not look out of the ordinary at all.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when you prepared this wine, you also fully knew that someone drinking wine with pesticides in it would not be able to smell the pesticides.
Yes.
And you had access to pesticides at the winery.
Yes, I did.
Now, you took this bottle back to the night of the rehearsal dinner. You took this bottle of wine and later presented Genesis with it.
Yes, as a gift.
Now, this was the same bottle of wine that was later found to have had pesticides in it.
Unfortunately so, yes.
Now, one last thing. You tried to pay Genesis to leave, Casey, didn't you?
At one point, yes.
You left her an envelope with a check for $300,000 in it for her.
Yes, I did.
And you also left a note in this envelope?
I'm sorry, it cut out. What did you say?
You also left a note in this envelope?
Yes, yes, I did.
Now, you'd recognize this note if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, permission to display what has been previously marked as Exhibit 24 constructively out of the view of the jury.
You may.
Ms. Martini, can you see the document on the screen?
Yes, I can.
You recognize this note, don't you?
Yes, I do.
It's the note you left in the envelope, isn't it?
Yes.
And it hasn't been changed or altered in any manner.
No.
And it's a fair and accurate copy of this note?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we move to admit Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objection? Any objection from the defense?
Sorry, no, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 24 is admitted.
Now, when Genesis saw this note, she put it back in the envelope and threw it at you.
That's correct. She kept the check, though.
And in this note, you say, leave Casey and the enclosed $300,000 is yours.
Yes.
You then go on to say, you have till the 7th, choose wisely.
That's correct.
Now, you were referring to June 7th, 2019 when you wrote this.
Yes.
And isn't it true that early the next morning after June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo unfortunately passed away?
Unfortunately, yes.
And Ms. Martini, isn't it true that you said you feel relieved, even happy, that Genesis Petrillo is no longer in your life?
I'm not happy about the way that she is no longer in our lives, but that it's correct. I am happy that she is out.
So that is a yes to my question.
Yes.
Your Honor, I have no further questions. We pass this witness.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor. At this time, we ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
Any objection from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Martini, you're not excused because you're the defendant, but you can step down with thanks to the court.
Thank you.
Further witnesses from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we would like to call Dr. Reese Cannon to the stand. May I proceed?
You may. Witness has already been sworn.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Absolutely. My name is Dr. Reese Cannon.
And what is your current occupation?
Well, currently I'm a consultant with Gartner Consulting Incorporated, but I was previously the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, as well as serving as a professor of toxicology at Midlands Medical School.
And why are you here today?
Well, I was hired by Harper Martini to assess the findings of Dr. Kwan, as well as present my own analysis as to the reasons for Genesis Petrillo's passing.
All right, Dr. Cannon, but before we move on, can you tell us a little bit about your education and background?
Absolutely. I earned my bachelor's in chemistry from The Ohio State University. I then went on to attend Harvard Medical School, where I earned my MD with an emphasis in toxicology.
And have you ever testified in court before?
I have. I've testified in 35 legal cases having to do with medicine in areas such as toxicology and pharmacology. I'm certified as an expert to testify in 6 states.
And is your testimony today based on sufficient facts and data?
Yes. In my analysis, I reviewed exhibits 5, 6, 7, 10, 23, as well as the report of Dr. Kwan and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
And what methods did you use to come to your conclusions today?
Well, I use methods of analysis that I learned in my time at Harvard Medical School, as well as in my fellowship, my position of teaching toxicology at Midlands Medical School.
And do you use these methods reliably in your field?
Of course I do.
And did you reliably apply these methods today?
Absolutely, I did.
All right, Dr. Cannon, you said that you were here to assess the findings of Dr. Jimin Kwan. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, Dr. Kwan made a few assumptions in her report, pardon me, throughout their interaction with Ms. Petrillo, and the numerous factors affecting their system were kind of ignored by some of these assumptions.
Now, I'd like to walk you through the night of the 8th, or the 7th rather, if that's all right. What was the first assumption that you say Dr. Kwan could have made?
Well, when Ms. Petrillo was first admitted, her symptoms really mirrored that of an alcohol poisoning case. And so Dr. Kwan's assumption that it was an alcohol poisoning case was sound, but this was quickly dismissed.
And Dr. Kwan then examined Genesis Petrillo. Were there any assumptions that were made to this point?
Yes, so Dr. Kwan took the totality of Genesis' symptoms to mean that she was suffering from organophosphate poisoning. And when you consider the other plethora of things that her symptoms could have pointed to, this is particularly troubling.
And what are these other possibilities?
Well, there are three that I detail in my report. There's hepatic disease, a possible allergic reaction, and alcohol poisoning.
All right, Dr. Cannon, what can you tell us about hepatic disease?
Well, Ms. Petrillo's symptoms did point to this in some ways, such as her constricted pupils, lethargy, and low levels of the naturally occurring enzyme acetylcholinesterase. All this does point toward hepatic disease, but it was never considered by Dr. Kwan, and it could have even been triggered by Ms. Petrillo's consumption of alcohol.
And what about your second possibility, an allergic reaction?
Yes, so the respiratory arrest that Ms. Petrillo exhibited toward the end of the evening, unfortunately, could have been caused by an allergic reaction. In fact, it's the staple symptom. This was never considered, though, by Dr. Kwan.
And your final possibility, alcohol poisoning? What can you tell us about that?
Yes, so alcohol poisoning was perhaps the first amongst those that were ruled out, despite the overwhelming evidence that it could have been the case. Dr. Kwan never knew what Ms. Petrillo's peak alcohol level, blood alcohol level was, nor did she attempt to determine it. And given their symptoms, she was struggling to walk, vomiting, she was nauseated, she had slurred speech, stomach pain. All of this pointed to the possibility of alcohol poisoning, but it was ruled out, which really could have been a major consequence in the final outcome.
And was there anything wrong with the tests that Dr. Kwan had ordered that night?
No, I believe that those tests were necessary, but there were some assumptions made from their results that, were troubling.
And would you recognize those tests if I show them to you today?
Absolutely, counsel, I would.
Your Honor, permission to show opposing counsel and the witness would have been previously marked as Exhibit 5.
I think this is not just marked, but it's been admitted. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may.
All right. All right. Dr. Cannon, what stands out to you about this test?
Well, pardon me. This test specifically was intended to test for Ms. Petrillo's level of acetylcholinesterase. But the issue with that is that acetylcholinesterase is not necessarily an indicator of organophosphate poisoning. It occurs naturally in the body and can be inhibited by organophosphate, but it can also be inhibited by things like hepatic disease. So it's not necessarily tied to organophosphates. And to proceed on the assumption that you do have an organophosphate poisoning case is risky. It's risky because it might not be. It's not a true indicator for sure.
Dr. Cannon, is there anything else that stands out to you?
No, counsel, I've said my piece.
All right, thank you. Dr. Cannon, would you be able to tell us a little bit about Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol content that night?
Absolutely. So when it was measured, it was 0.16. Now, the thing about that is it's not possible to use that as an indicator for what Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol content actually was that night. At its peak, it was likely much higher. And the thing about alcohol poisoning is that it depends on the person, it depends on their body mass and whatnot. But the symptoms that she exhibited were consistent with someone who had a much higher blood alcohol content, in the range with even some of the highest blood alcohol contents out there, at least fatalities.
All right. Your Honor, permission to show opposing counsel and the witness would have been previously marked as Exhibit 23.
You may.
Oh, I gotta scroll to it. All right. All right. Dr. Cannon, what have I just showed you?
This is an alcohol impairment chart, standard in the field, used kind of to just display the symptoms that go with the different levels of intoxication.
And is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it has not.
All right, Your Honor, I would like to move Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
23 is admitted.
Dr. Cannon, what can you tell us about Genesis Petrillo's BAC this night in relation to her symptoms?
Absolutely. So here at about the 0.12 to the 0.15 blood alcohol content range, we see some symptoms that are consistent with those that Ms. Petrillo exhibited on the evening that she passed away. Those symptoms that Ms. Petrillo exhibited were consistent with someone who had a much higher blood alcohol content. And so it kind of calls into question what was tested.
And Dr. Cannon, can you tell us anything about the symptoms that Genesis Petrillo displayed right before her passing?
Absolutely. So her coma, unconsciousness, and respiratory arrest, as well as even their bronchospasms, are suspect when compared with the symptoms along the lower ends of this chart. And because we don't know what Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol content peaked at or what those highest levels were, it's absolutely possible that her symptoms were a result of that peak. Any doctor in the field can tell you once alcohol poisoning is achieved, no decrease in blood alcohol content after that peak is going to get rid of it. Treatment is required.
All right. And Dr. Cannon, what are some of the major assumptions that were up to this point?
Sure. So after proceeding under the assumption that Ms. Petrillo was suffering from organophosphate poisoning, Dr. Kwan ruled out that alcohol poisoning was in fact a consequential factor. Dr. Kwan ruled this out, and I really have to contend that this assumption ignores Ms. Petrillo's other symptoms and the factors that evening. She had been drinking, and because Dr. Kwan didn't take the time to consider that peak blood alcohol content, it can't be ruled out that alcohol poisoning was a major contributing factor in their passing.
Now, Dr. Cannon, can you tell us your conclusions in today's case?
Dr. Kwan, following only her assumption about organophosphate poisoning, made the decision to treat Ms. Petrillo without actually knowing with medical certainty that organophosphate was the cause of their symptoms. And ultimately, they passed away. With the myriad of other possibilities and factors, we can never know for sure what truly killed Ms. Petrillo.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cannon. At this time, I have no further questions and tender this witness for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Cross-examination from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Am I ready to proceed? Dr. Cannon, you mentioned that you work for Gardening Consulting.
Gardner Consulting Incorporated. Yes.
Okay, Gardner Consulting Incorporated. And that one of your biggest clients is Dusky Roach and Rodent Killer.
Yes, I believe that's true.
And that the CEO of Dusky Roach and Rodent Killer mentioned that they would find it extremely important that the pesticide not to be at all responsible for Ms. Petrio's death.
Perhaps, but at the employee level, I feel that my job is to come here and testify honestly to what I believe the case was.
Dr. Cannon, is that a yes to the CEO of Dusky Roach and Rodent mentioning that to you, though?
I did answer affirmatively, yes.
And you would agree that if you lose Dusky Roach and Rodent Killer as one of your clients, which is one of your biggest, it would be a great loss to the company?
It would. It would.
And now for the exhibits that you reviewed, and as well as the affidavits and the records, they were only limited, right?
Only limited?
Yeah, you only had limited exhibits and only to Dr. Kwan's and Angel's. Rodriguez.
I see. Yes, those are all the exhibits that I examined in my analysis.
You did not have any contact with Miss Petrio's body, right?
No, I believe she was cremated, so I did not have the opportunity.
Nor you talked to anybody associated with the events that happened that night.
No, aside from reviewing exhibits, I think that would be improper.
So we concluded that you did not speak to no one and you did not have any contact or was near Genesis Petrio.
Well, medical conclusions don't require that kind of thing, so no.
But it's a yes that you had no contact with anybody nor had examination over Genesis Petrio's body?
Oh, pardon me, I think I just got it mixed up. Yes, no, I have not had contact, but it's for that reason. It's not required.
And as for your conclusions, you had 4 conclusions, right?
I believe I had, yes, that's correct. I mentioned 3.
And you agree with Dr. Kwan's findings that the ultimate death ultimately what led to Genesis Petrio's death was a respiratory failure?
Yes, I said that was the most likely cause.
And for your other one, which was alcohol poisoning, the one that you found most likely, you were aware that Genesis Petrio had a BAC of 0.16 when entering the hospital?
When it was tested, that is true, but not necessarily a peak.
And you personally have never seen a fatality with a BAC lower than a 0.30?
No, I have not. Not in my practice, no.
And you also mentioned jaundice, hepatic disease, which one of the symptoms is jaundice, which Genesis Petrio did not have any symptoms, correct?
No, although key thing to note is that jaundice can be really hard to notice. This is the whites of your eyes, so.
But Genesis Petrio did not exhibit any symptoms of jaundice that night, as for yellowing of the skin.
No, none that were noticed.
And as for an allergic reaction to food, did Genesis Petrio have any symptoms that could have led to that?
She had symptoms that could have been tied to an allergic reaction, yes.
But as for a rash or anything that was visible to the eye, there was none?
No.
And you are aware that the only thing that tested positive for an organophosphate was the wine that evening?
Was what appeared to be wine in stomach, yes.
And Dr. Cannon, you're also aware that the testing of the blood results also showed organophosphate in the Genesis Petrio's body?
I am aware of that.
And you also agreed, you've mentioned that you agree with the findings that what led to the death of Genesis Petrio was the respiratory failure.
Again, I did say that was most likely.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Say that again.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect.
None, Your Honor. I just asked the witness be allowed to step down.
Any objection, Ms. Ireland?
None, Your Honor.
The good doctor can step down and is excused with the thanks of the court. Further witnesses from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We would like to call Austin Lewis to the stand.
Mr. Lewis, you have been previously constructively sworn. So, Ms. Yates, when you're ready, the witness is yours.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Lewis, can you please state your name and occupation for the court?
Howdy, my name is Austin Lewis, and I'm the head winemaker at Peony Estates Winery.
And what are your responsibilities as head winemaker?
As head winemaker, I oversee all of the daily operations for the facility, so everything from bottling, harvesting, fermenting, safety trainings, employee trainings, all that kind of good stuff.
And how did you end up working at Peony Estates?
I met Harper Martini while I was an employee at Danny Francasio's winery, Rosie and Pedro's. Them and I got to be fast friends, and one day they just came up to me, said they were going to be starting their own winery, and offered me a position as their head production manager, and I took hold of it.
And have you ever ran into any issues as head winemaker at Peony Estates?
Of course, running a business can be difficult, so problems are to be expected. The biggest one that we faced, however, was that the property jutted right up next to the Salvage Swamp. So right from day one, we were battling against all manner of little critters and bugs.
And what kind of problems do those pests pose to Peony Estates?
The biggest issue that they posed, obviously, was just to the safety and integrity of both our growing areas and our production areas, because having bugs around us, it's obviously not a good thing when you're handling food and drink.
And how did you try to handle these pests?
We did try starting out small, doing the easy stuff first of using organic pesticides and the like. However, these bugs, they just wouldn't go. So we did have to step it up to using chemical pesticides on the outside, and eventually we had to start using them inside as well.
And did you ever have any concerns about using these chemical pesticides?
Of course, my biggest concern being that the way our growing area is that it was on an incline that had a little bit of flatland at the basin. So we were worried that as, rain and everything hits, that it would wash down the pesticides and kind of pool up there at the flat part. And make those products unusable.
And did you ever do anything to try and prevent this?
Yes, obviously we couldn't change the slant of our field. However, we did begin roping off them flat sections of the basins. We would harvest those roped off areas separately and dispose of them without question.
And was there ever any tests conducted to make sure that this plan of action worked?
Yes, in 2018, FDA Inspector O'Keefe came by. They took about 20 samples of our different wines, and they summarized all their findings in the report for us.
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis?
Relevant.
And explain your objection.
I'm not sure what relevance the crops of Peony Estates or how they handled that has to do with a case about battery.
Response.
Yes, sir. So if I may proffer a little, this is basically going to foundation that this is explaining why there is any pesticide within any of our wine at all, and that will be reflected in our lab report, that this will be a permissible amount, and that is why in the end that there is some anyways.
I think the presence or absence of the pesticide within the estate, the way that the state and the winery use that pesticide may explain the circumstances surrounding the death in this case. And so I do find that this is relevant under 401. And so I'm going to overrule your objection, Mr. Holland, and allow the question. At the same time, if we get too far afield into the manner in which the winery does business to the point that we've lost the relevance, you're welcome to object again.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, permission to share my screen with Exhibit 9. It has been previously entered into evidence without objection and published to the jury.
You may.
Mr. Lewis, sorry, that's the wrong one. Wrong one. This is not going well. There we go. Okay. Mr. Lewis, is the car wine included within this test?
Yes, it is.
And is there a permissible amount of isophenous organose phosphate that is allowed in wine?
Yes, the permissible amount of isophenphos in wine, according to the FDA, is 50 microgram per liter.
And how many micrograms per liter is included in the Cara wine?
In the Cara wine, it was found that there were 45 micrograms, which is considered to be a high concentration. However, again, per FDA guidelines, that is permissible and still considered safe.
Okay, thank you. And was the wine ever tested again?
Technically it was, however, that was not until a wine bottle was found in our dumpster.
Your Honor, permission to share my screen, Exhibit 10, which has already been previously admitted under Stipulation 3, and publish it to the jury.
You may.
Okay. And Mr. Lewis, was the Cara wine included within this test?
Yes, in this one specifically.
And did the Cara wine test significantly higher in this test than it did before?
Absolutely, undeniably, it did. But it is important to note that this bottle specifically was found in the same dumpster that just a few days prior we had disposed of partially empty pesticide containers.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I have no further questions, and I ask the witness be allowed to step down. No, just kidding. We got to do cross first. That's my beat.
And just in time as well. Cross-examination from the defense. Mr. Holland?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Mr. Lewis, let's talk about why we're here today, the death of Genesis Petrillo. You're aware that Genesis and the defendant did not get along?
Yes, Harper and I were friends, and I had overheard that from them several times.
And they didn't get along so much that the defendant repeatedly announced her hatred towards Genesis?
Like I said, we were friends. They vented, so the answer would be yes. They expressed that frustration.
And that hatred was so intense that the defendant mentioned that if she can make Genesis disappear, she would.
Yes, they did say that, indeed.
And also, the defendant was aware of how poisonous and fatal pesticide could be.
Yes, obviously, they headed a winery. It was important for them to know that type of thing.
So they were aware of that, correct?
Yes, I said yes.
And they were aware it was so fatal that even an employee almost died from contaminated wine, correct?
Yes, they were aware. We did have one mishap like that.
The defendant also mentioned to you that contaminated wine with pesticides, it doesn't have a smell.
Yes, they did say that it would be hard for people to detect.
You also own 10% of P&E Estates, correct?
Yes, that was part of the condition of my entering the business.
And if the defendant lost this lawsuit, that give P&E Estates a bad reputation.
Absolutely, yes.
And with P&E having a bad reputation, you feel that P&E could potentially lose business.
I wouldn't go on to say how I feel, but yes, there would be a reality. We would likely be losing business.
Yeah, but it is most likely to happen, correct?
Yes.
And that would mean that you'd be out of a job.
If nobody's buying it, I'm not working, so yes.
And without your job at P&E, that's probably the last thing you want to happen.
Obviously, nobody wants to be unemployed, sir, so yes.
I pass the witness, Your Honor. No further questions.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor.
May this witness step down?
Thank you.
Any objection for Mr. Holland?
No objections, Your Honor.
Mr. Lewis, you are excused with the thanks of the court. Anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor, we're ready to move on to closing statements.
All right, so by my account, we have exactly 30 minutes left. And if I understand the rules correctly, the grand total amount of time for both opening and closing combined for each side is 12 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
How long does the plaintiff have left within that 12 minutes?
Let me refer to my co-counsel.
Your Honor, the plaintiff has 6:55 left for their closing.
Does defense agree? Yes?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and how long does defense have?
The defense has 6:15 for closing.
I'm having a hard time understanding or hearing the timekeeper from the defense.
6 minutes and 15 seconds for closing for the defense side.
And the people or the plaintiff agrees with that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Remarkably consistent there, you guys. You both have a little less than 6 minutes left. That's so we have to be done in a half an hour. We've got 12 minutes, 13, maybe 14 minutes to be exact, or to be safe. So I think we can take a quick break. Let's take a short 5, be back here at 30. Is that acceptable?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
We're in recess. Thank you. All right, we are back on the record in Portrillo v. Peony Estates and Harper Martinez. Do I have both parties ready to proceed?
Plaintiff is ready, Your Honor.
Defense?
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
Excellent. We will constructively read the jury instructions to the jury, and having done that, the plaintiff can proceed with their closing arguments. I'm assuming that any time you have remaining, you're going to reserve for rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good. Mr. Holland, whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. It is completely tragic and sad that we all have to be here today. A wedding for a couple is supposed to be the beginning of a new journey, but for this couple, it was simply the beginning of the end. Genesis Petrillo was a kind and sweet person who got along with and loved everyone that she met. Genesis had received a job offer in France and planned on moving there with Casey after the two of them got married. That was the beginning of Genesis's relationship with Casey. The end of that relationship is what we're left with today. We're left with a grieving fiance, a grieving family, and a young life cut far too short. Before going further, I'm going to explain how we proved the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo. In order to do this, we have to do it to a preponderance of the evidence because the burden of proof falls on the plaintiff. In order to prove battery, we have to show three key elements. The first two elements are to prove an act by the defendant and intent to cause harmful or offensive contact. Refer back to the note that you saw earlier written by the defendant. In this note, the defendant states that Genesis Petrillo has until the 7th of June to leave, or else the defendant would do it the hard way. Now, this piece of evidence alone shows that the defendant had intent to act against Genesis. But that's not the only thing. Today, we've had multiple witnesses who could tell you that the defendant hated Genesis. Not only has the defendant repeatedly threatened Genesis, even going to the lengths of jokingly telling Angel Rodriguez that a canister of pesticides was meant for Genesis. The defendant also has openly talked about using pesticides on Genesis and has also expressed a desire to get rid of Genesis on multiple accounts. Up until the moment the defendant gave Genesis that wine bottle, the defendant has expressed zero care or remorse for the life of Genesis Petrillo. And that lack of care for Genesis and her life is what led the defendant to cause harmful contact. These facts alone prove both act and intent, but there's one more element that we have to prove, and that element is the result of harmful or offensive contact. The bottle of wine the defendant gave Genesis was proven to have pesticides inside of it, and after further testing, the bottle of wine given to Genesis seemed to be the only food-related item that tested positive for pesticides. Now, Dr. Kwan has assured you that it was in fact organophosphate poisoning and respiratory failure that was the most likely result of the unfortunate death of Genesis Petrillo. But we're not only here to tell you how the defendant intentionally poisoned Genesis, we are also here to tell you why the defendant would do something like that. Getting Genesis out of Casey's life is what the defendant felt was the best outcome for Casey. Casey meant the world to the defendant. The defendant goes the lengths of describing Casey as being perfect with only one flaw. And that flaw was Genesis. The defendant resented Genesis since the day the two met. Why? Simply because Genesis didn't like the way the wine from Peony Estates tasted. And since that day, the defendant constantly tried to not only push Casey away from Genesis, but to get rid of Genesis, even going to the lengths of attempting to pay Genesis off if she left Casey alone. Now, when not even money can solve your issues, you start asking yourself, well, what can? And the defendant certainly found their answer, the answer that was at the end of a bottle. What nobody knew was the lengths the defendant would go to protect their only child and keep Casey away from Genesis. What nobody knew was the pesticides purposely placed in that bottle of wine that the defendant specifically only wanted Genesis to drink. What nobody knew was that the defendant would die from pesticide poisoning that very next morning. Nobody except the defendant. The defendant always hated Genesis and never wanted to make peace with her. But the defendant did get peace from Genesis dying. The defendant finally got Genesis out of the Casey's life. That was the biggest dream the defendant desperately begged for. It finally came true at the expense of the Petrillo family, at the expense of Casey, and at the expense of everyone who loved and cared for Genesis Petrillo. We aren't here to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo. We are here to show you that it is more likely than not that the defendant intended to cause harmful contact to Genesis by purposely poisoning her. That's not an assumption. We're not assuming that. We're bringing you the facts. Think of it like a scale. If we tip evidence and pile evidence up on that scale, and it slightly, even slightly tips in our favor, then we've met our burden. All that's left is for you to see that we met that burden. Finding the defendant liable for Genesis's death, it's not going to close the hole left in the Petrillo family's lives or in Casey's life. Genesis was taken away from them, so the only thing they have from Genesis is the memories that they have and the headstone of Genesis that they may visit on her birthdays. They aren't going to get to see Genesis get married. They aren't going to get to see her off at the airport when she finally leaves for Paris. And they aren't going to get a call from Genesis telling her how great, her telling you how great her life with Casey is and how she loves France. But what they can get is proper justice for their daughter. Let's make sure that the Petrillos are finally able to rest at night knowing that you, the jury, made the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. How long does Mr. Holland have remaining?
He has 1 minute and 4 seconds, Your Honor.
Defense agree?
Yes, Your Honor, I agree.
All righty. Mr. McDowell, closing argument from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury, may it please the court. Before I do anything, before I present any facts, any evidence, or show any assumption that was made by the plaintiff in today's case, the first thing that I would like to do personally is give our condolences to the family of Genesis Petrillo. We can agree with the plaintiff that this was a young woman's life that was lost too early. Now, members of the jury, while we can both agree that her life was lost too early, we cannot agree on how Genesis's life was lost too early. Now, members of the jury, today, the plaintiff stated themselves that they have a burden of proof in today's case. They were to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which simply means that it is more likely than not that an act was committed by the defendant being Harper Martini in today's case, that there was an intent to cause harmful or offensive contact, and that the harmful or offensive contact was towards the plaintiff, Genesis Petrillo. Now, Mr. Christian came before you in an opening statement and told you that it was dangerous to assume. And merely all we heard today was nothing but assumptions that were given by the plaintiff about what happened. Now, they also mentioned the scales of justice. Those are very important when we look at today's case, because they're saying that if it leans slightly in their direction, then they have proved their burden. But if it leans slightly in ours, then they have not proved their burden. And when we look at their scale, members of the jury, the only thing that is on their scale to tip it are assumptions. And members of the jury, you know what they say when you assume something. Now, what did they assume exactly in today's case? They assumed that Harper committed an act in the first place, because we saw today on Exhibit 9, which was a lab report done from Carowine itself, that the isofenfos levels were within FDA regulated levels. This means that they could have served the wine itself and that there was nothing exactly wrong with this wine in particular. This is where we get to the act that they're trying to assume before you. When we look at Exhibit 10 in today's case, the bottle of Cara wine that was actually tested, we heard from Austin Lewis today that prior to the wedding rehearsal, that through safety precautions, they disposed of this bottle of canisters relating to pesticides in the dumpster. The same exact location of the bottle of Cara wine. And members of the jury, is it more likely than not that Harper Martini would intentionally place pesticides within a wine bottle that was meant to go to the fiance of their own daughter? Their own daughter, members of the jury. And that's what I want you to think about. Just sit for a minute, because I want this question to sit with you like a fine wine. Members of the jury, is it more likely than not that Harper Martini would risk their own relationship with their only child just to eliminate someone from their lives? Let us sit with you in a minute. Does that seem likely at all? Members of the jury, Harper Martini would never go as far as to poisoning somebody and risking their relationship with their only child. Now, we also was given the assumption today that there was only one way that Harper could have done this, and that Genesis could have died. And this was through pesticide poisoning. But members of the jury, we heard from Dr. Canada today that there was a blood alcohol concentration chart. And on this chart, there was experienced symptoms of Genesis Petrillo that corresponded with alcohol poisoning. These included that they fell into a coma. And this is within the BAC levels of 0.35. And Dr. Cannon testified to us today that they have never seen a death anywhere involving alcohol poisoning below 0.30. Members of the jury, the facts show that there was nothing that could show anything relating to Harper Martini poisoning this bottle. Nobody saw Harper poison this bottle. They just merely assumed that Harper poisoned this bottle with no evidence, no facts, and no reason. Members of the jury, it is dangerous to assume. Do not assume guilt without evidence and facts. Members of the jury, I ask that you find Harper Martini not liable for the civil battery against Genesis Petrillo, because it is dangerous to assume without facts, evidence, and reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDowell. Mr. Holland, you have 60 seconds.
Yes, Your Honor. As I've stated, we are here presenting the facts of the case to you. These are facts, not assumptions. Are we assuming that the defendant hated Genesis Petrillo? No. Multiple witnesses here today have recalled and confirmed that hate. Are we assuming that the defendant had intentions to commit an act against Genesis? No. The defendant themselves has confirmed here today that they warned Genesis to leave by June 7th or else. Are we assuming that Genesis Petrillo's most likely cause of death was organophosphate poisoning? No. Dr. Kwan has confirmed that it is the most likely cause of death. The only assumption made today is that the defense wants you to assume that the defendant didn't do it. They want you to assume that the bottle of wine being in the dumpster is the reason it was contaminated. Ladies and gentlemen, we aren't here for assumptions, mistakes, or coincidences. Is it a coincidence that Genesis rejected the defendant's offer to be paid off on the same day she got poisoned? Is it a coincidence that the defendant jokingly states that the pesticides were meant for Genesis? Is it a coincidence that Genesis dies from pesticide poisoning the very next morning? These aren't coincidences, and they certainly aren't assumptions or mistakes. They are deliberate actions the defendant took to rid themselves of Genesis. Ladies and gentlemen, the only
Mr.
verdict
Hellman, that is your time. All right. Excellent job, guys. Let's take a quick break, and as soon as the scoring judges indicate that they're ready to go, we'll give some comments. Judge Velasquez and Judge Cooper, you guys need some more time?
I'm ready, but I believe Brandon needs another second.
Take all the time you need.
Thank you.
All right. It looks like Mr. Cooper is good to go. He's just working on his microphone. So let's get everybody up here on their video. Outstanding work, you guys. You have heard a lot from me. So I'm going to go last. I'm going to turn it over to Judge Cooper and Judge Velasquez, wherever she went. Oh, there she is.
Yes, hi.
Go right ahead.
I'll go first because I think Judge Cooper is still working on his microphone. So as soon as we figure that out. But first of all, good job to everybody. I'm allowed to introduce myself now. So my name is Elizabeth. I am a Baylor mock trial alum, did it all through undergrad. So I've been through the ringer, I know. I, since graduating, have moved to Washington, D.C. and now work for the Embassy of Afghanistan. So that's who I am. Am I allowed to know? Yes, I'm allowed to know at this point where you guys are from. So plaintiff, what school are you guys from?
So we're the University of Texas at Arlington.
Oh, okay, nice. And defense?
We are.
Wait,
Go ahead,
say it
AJ.
one more time.
All right. We are Kennesaw State University.
Cool. Okay, where's Kennesaw State?
Kennesaw, Georgia.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, Georgia, that's fun. Well, congratulations to both of you. You both did a very good job, and I could tell that you were all very prepared for your roles and for today's competition. So I commend you for that, for your preparation. It was an excellent trial to watch, and I had a lot of fun. I'm going to stick to pretty high-level concerns, so things that apply to almost everyone. Of course, I have specific comments for attorneys versus witnesses, stuff like that, but I also submitted the comment sheets, so if you want to know what my thoughts are on your specific performance, then be sure to check that out. I believe Tab Room will be able to give that to you guys. So I'll just jump right in. Like I said, you all did a great job. So these are all kind of nitpicky, super small things that you guys can focus on moving into the competitive season. Okay, so I liked both of your themes, but I wanted to hear them more. You guys used them really well in your openings and closings, but I really wanted to hear them woven throughout the trial. It got to the point where we were almost to closings and I had to remind myself, look back at my notes and say, oh, what was their theme again? I shouldn't have to do that. I should be hearing your theme from every single witness. In terms of the actual material, don't be afraid to object. There were very few objections this round and a lot of objectionable materials.
Yeah, you guys made it too easy on me.
I know. Even if you think the other attorney has a response for it, if you like see this hearsay and you think, oh my gosh, that's an obvious exception, you know, I shouldn't object to that. At this level, I think that you still should, because it's likely that the other attorney maybe doesn't know that exception and you might be able to get this piece of hearsay out, or maybe you'll throw off the rhythm of the other attorney and their witness. So I do think it's worth objecting to material, especially at the non-competitive stage, just to make you better and more comfortable with objections and to make the other attorney better and more comfortable with responding to those objections. In terms of my witnesses, I want to say that it is okay to fight on cross. I feel like I had to give the opposite advice yesterday night, but don't just roll over. You're not just there to say yes and no and then go home, right? If the attorney is trying to pin you down to something in your affidavit, or they're trying to get out some information that you definitely don't want to come to light, you can phrase that however you want, right? You can turn this around and maybe provide some context or some explanation to why you said what you said or why you did what you did, right? It's not enough to say, yes, I said that. Tell me why. What circumstances came about that make this less, you know, insane for you to have said? I mean, at this point, you've had the case for several months now, so you know what you're likely to be crossed on. All of the really hard points have prepared answers for. Prepared explanations that make sense, that kind of play down how bad some of the stuff in your affidavit is. Another thing for my witnesses, don't lose your character on cross. A lot of times I saw great character on direct, funny answers, really good accents, things like that. And then sometimes that didn't translate quite so well to our cross examinations. So make sure that whatever character you have on your direct is brilliant and incredible and great, but stick with that whenever you go into your cross examination. Maybe that means that you make a couple jokes with your crossing attorneys for some of my character witnesses, right? That's totally fine and makes it so much more interesting for all of us to watch. Another point on cross, both of my attorneys and my witnesses need to slow down. Oftentimes we get into this speed with our crossing attorneys where it's rapid fire. You ask a question, I give you one sentence answer, and before anyone gets to process that answer or take a breather, we're on to the next question, and it just moves really, really fast and makes it really hard for judges and juries to follow it. So witnesses, whenever you're asked a question, take a breather, stop, count to 5, do whatever you want. I don't really care, but pause for a second before you answer. I felt like half the time, have you ever seen like trivia game shows where the host is like asking a question and one of the people like buzzes in before they actually finish the question? That's not what we want to do. We don't want to be bad trivia game show participants, right? Take a second, listen to the full question, process how you want to answer, and slow down that pace. The same goes for my attorneys. Especially if the witness gives you a particularly damning answer on cross, right? Pause for a minute. let that ruminate. Let the jury think about what they said. If they said something that was wrong, or if they agreed to a point that you really wanted them to agree on or makes their case look particularly bad, take a second, breathe, and just let everyone listen to the answer before you start your next question. I think that's all I have. That applies to everybody. And then I have individual comments on the comment sheets as well. Is your microphone working?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Perfect, perfect. My computer mic was not working for some reason. Just to introduce myself, my name is Brandon. I'm a management consultant in the Dallas area. And I was on Baylor's mock trial team for 4 years, got to compete at nationals, got to do a lot of fun stuff. So it was a great time while there. Love mock trial. I also wrote individual comments, so you'll be able to see those. So I'm also only going to do some very broad comments that apply to everyone across the board. First of all, I would suggest having greater energy, everyone across the board. I know dealing with law and everything like that, people that aren't inside mock trial might think it's sometimes dry and stuff like that. But especially in this virtual environment, you need constant energy. You need to look like you're excited to be here. It makes it a lot easier for judges to follow along with what you're doing and stay engaged, because it is a lot easier to get distracted and to zone out if you're not constantly bringing forth energy that shows you're about what you're doing. And really, it's just nice to see everyone have fun, because that's what this is about at this point in your careers, is just having fun and really bringing out the mock trialness of this competition. I would suggest being more conversational. Elizabeth made a great point about pausing after you're asked a question. Attorneys, pausing after you hear someone give you an answer. Because in real life, you're not scripted. In real life, you're not just going to spit something out as soon as someone asks you, or spit something out as soon as you hear a response. I'll add on to that as well. Attorneys, you can ask shorter questions. A lot of times, whenever you ask a question, it's super long, maybe a little bit leading. I think in real life, you don't know what the witness is going to say. So ask them a shorter question. Instead of suggesting an answer, you can just simply ask a witness why after they say something. For example, that can be really effective whenever you're dealing with an expert who is talking about a lot of science and a lot of things that we might not know about. You can just simply say, could you explain that? Why is that? Just simple things like that can make it seem a lot more real and a lot more conversational. I would also suggest taking advantage of this virtual environment that we have here. Something I was really impressed with from the plaintiff is how seamless and smooth your use of screen share was. I definitely highly recommend that from every team in this virtual format. I don't know if you got to see any of the senior competition that they did that AMTA hosted through Zoom, or the trial by combat stuff. All of the top teams use the screen share, they use PowerPoint, and they use demonstratives throughout the case in chief. And that's always something that really impresses me. And going back to that, having energy and keeping the audience engaged, that is one way to do it, is to always have demos throughout the entirety of the trial. And making sure that they're always smooth and seamless is very important. I suggest having co-counsel ready with the PowerPoint, so that we don't have to see a browser, don't have to see all the exhibits that you're going to use at once. I think that can be very effective. For the attorneys, I think you can all make bigger points about your cross-examination whenever you come to something that's really important. All of you had great points, but you need to emphasize them more whenever you get to them. I'm just going to use an example for the plaintiff. I know with your theory, there are a ton of bad quotes that are super bad and portray the defendant in a very bad light. Like the note says something like, I want you gone by the 7th. You can slow down, be loud, and make that really dramatic instead of just saying the quote and moving right by it. That can be really impactful whenever it comes to getting your point across. And then for the witnesses, something I really like to see is having the same demeanor and the same character on direct and cross-examination. A lot of times what the case is that someone will be very nice on direct, and then on cross, you'll immediately become combative with the opposing counsel. And I suggest if you're going to be a nice witness, also be nice on cross. One person I thought that was really impactful with, and someone who did that really well, was the last defense witness. You were very straightforward on cross, and I think that made you very credible, especially when they were attacking you with all this bias about, this would paint your company in a very bad light. And the responses you gave were, yes, absolutely, it would. And instead of trying to explain that away and make it not seem like a big deal, you just rolled with it. And I thought that was great, especially when they were attacking you with something that would normally seem really bad if you fought it off really well, or if you fought it off too much. But those are some of my broad comments. You'll get to see my individual comments that I shared with the tap room.
All right, guys. And my name is Jake Friedberg. As you can tell, I'm from Denver. I'm a senior deputy district attorney with the Denver District Attorney's Office. Specifically, I'm assigned to our gang unit. So I try cases that have a gang nexus. I specialize in gang violence. I went to CU for undergrad and for law school. I was on the undergrad mock trial tournament or the undergrad mock trial team at CU, and went to nationals. Coached their team before going to law school. I was on the competitive mock trial team in law school, and now as a district attorney, I've tried well over 100 trials to a jury. So this is what I do. This is what I love. That's why I'm here. And so I understand there are differences between obviously the real world and my trial world. So I'll highlight some of those as I'm talking to you guys. But let me start by saying this. I'm so impressed with all of you guys. I had to remind myself halfway through that you guys are undergrad, yeah? Right.
Yes, sir.
It's tremendous to me because, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've done this at all levels. And I can tell you that both of these teams would wipe the floor with many of the law school teams that I've seen. You guys would wipe this floor with some of the lawyers I've been up against based on your command of the rules of evidence and procedure. So I think that all the way around, you guys did an absolutely excellent job. I thought all of the witnesses were outstanding. So I applaud all of you guys. It was really a pleasure to listen to you guys testify. So I wanted a special shout out to the witnesses. At the same time, that's the portion of my show where I tell you how great you are, because that's not my job. My job here is to tell you what you screwed up on so you do better. And so I don't have a comment sheet because I'm just the presiding judge. I will stick around if any of you guys want to ask me individual questions, but I'm going to go and do what I call my global comments as well. I want to start with the concept that I call moving with purpose. Most of you guys stayed seated while you were doing things, and that's fine, right? It doesn't matter for the purpose of this tournament, whether you get up and move around or not. And I believe that in Texas, you can't get up and move around. But if you're going to get up and stand, then you need to be very careful about your movement. Let me give you an example, okay? So if I'm going to stand up here, then movement can either be very powerful or it can be very distracting. And the people that I had that were getting up and moving were swaying back and forth, right? We're kind of wandering a little bit. And here's the problem with that. As soon as I start doing this, you're not listening to me anymore, you're watching me, and it's distracting. And so if you're going to stand up, you have to have the discipline to plant your feet and stay put. And then if I'm doing this, now you're listening to me and you're not watching me anymore. And then you can use movement and I understand that your well is the size of your computer screen. So it makes it very difficult to move around, but I can still make small movements as I'm changing from one point to another. So I'm over here. This is where point number 1 lives. As I move to point number 2, I might come over here. And now this is point number 2 territory. And at the end, I may take a step back. I'm right in the middle of the screen. And this is when I ask, in my case, I was asked the jury to find the defendant guilty, right? So be very cognizant of that because it's important stuff and it separates you from others, makes you look more confident, makes you seem less nervous. The biggest problem that I had based in the presentation of the case is what I call trying to hide bad facts. All of you guys across the board on your direct examinations were guilty of this. And it is critically important that you have to accept your case. You have to accept your witnesses, warts and all. And if you don't bring up the issues on direct, just because you're hoping that that defense or that the other side isn't going to, you're going to be sorely mistaken, right? So you have to get out in front of the issues. I'll give you a quick example. I'm not going to tell a whole lot of war stories, but I had a case where I had a prostitute that was raped by a man who was posing as a undercover cop. The fact that she was a prostitute shouldn't have come in the first place, according to Colorado law, in my opinion. But the judge disagreed with me. And so her past came in. And so we had to spend time talking about her prior convictions for prostitution and some other issues that she had there. And look, in one hand, you may look at that and think this is not the most sympathetic witness in the world, but at the same time, that stuff was coming in. And so we got out ahead of it. We talked about it and we ended up spinning it as a positive because she had had so many experiences in her life in the past that she knew when this guy pulled up immediately that he wasn't an undercover cop because she'd been caught in undercover stings before. And so this credibility issue ended up being a positive. And so I want you guys to think about that, right? There are a whole bunch of stuff. And if I left that for the defense to bring up, then it looks like this big landmine that I'm afraid of. But when you get out in front of it, it doesn't, right? The fact that the decedent had a bunch of shots of tequila, I didn't hear in the plaintiff's case. It came out on the defense and it was a landmine. The fact that the one thing in bold on your toxicology report, next to whatever the name of that toxin is, says low. You guys got to address, I saw that. You guys just seem to ignore it. And it hurts your credibility and the jury's sitting there wondering, well, wait a minute. Isn't that important? The fact that our defendant offered to pay the decedent off to leave her life, that's something you guys have to, as the defense, acknowledge. Otherwise, when the plaintiff brought it up, it landed heavy. The fact that Dr. Cannon has this bias and has this connection to a pesticide company, you got to bring that stuff up, and then you can spin it. I think the plaintiff did a nice job at least acknowledging that the issue, the bias issue with their own doctor. You can't just ignore it. And then the prior near poisoning that occurred at this winery, and the issue that they had a problem with this exact potential poison before. Again, that's stuff that you just have to accept. So don't hide bad facts. I agree with my co-judge that visuals are huge, guys. Visuals are so important. Using your exhibits, using demonstratives is not only makes this more fun, it drives your point home clearer. Juries love it. I do it as much as possible. I want to see more and more of that. Don't just flash the exhibits up on the screen. Spend time reading them, looking over them, pointing them out. The more you can use visuals, the better. Can I ask you guys a quick question about the rules of the tournament? Are you not allowed to redirect? Did I miss that?
You are.
You are. How come nobody redirected? Okay. Listen, what I can tell you, both from as a student attorney and as a real attorney, there's nothing that any of us appreciate more than having the last word. And so when you get to redirect, you have the last word. So always redirect. And I think the problem that young attorneys and students have is they don't know what to say. And here's the way to remedy that. And you do this next round and you're going to have a better time. Who is taking notes? I'm guessing probably not a lot of you guys. And if you are taking notes, you don't know what to say. There's a very simple way to do this. Okay. I did this with you guys. I make a T-chart as I'm going along. I'm writing what for me, it's always cross-examination, right? So I'm listening to what the defense attorney is cross-examining my witness about, and I'm writing those questions down here. When I see something that I want to redirect, I circle it, come over here on the other side, and I write my question. And so I can say, defense counsel asked you about X. I want to go back and clean that up. And if you guys take notes like this, you'll know exactly what to say and how to respond to it. Do this next round. It'll make a difference. I've had many attorneys hear me complain about that many times, ignore me, and then ultimately decide they're going to give it a shot. And they've come back and told me it's made all the difference in the world. Take better notes. You'll know what to say. You'll be able to respond. And I'll tell you, that's to me what makes the difference in mock trial world. Everybody is good. Everybody is polished. Everybody presents a good case. I'm looking for people that roll with the punches better, that react to what's happening in trial. And you will react better when you take better notes, because otherwise you can probably anticipate what's coming, because you've all read this problem, you've had it for months, but there's going to be something different in every single round. Take notes. You're going to see it. You're going to be able to respond to it. It's critically important. I'm only going to take a couple more minutes, guys. I want to talk for a second about professionalism. I want you guys to know that both real jurors and your mock trial jurors, we just have to kind of sit there and watch and listen. So every little thing that happens becomes magnified, right? I'll give you an example. Mr. McDowell, I think you're an outstanding attorney and a great advocate, but the photo that pops up when your camera's off is you, is you with your PlayStation controller. It's like your gamer tag. It's not a good look, bro. Okay. And it comes down to this. It just doesn't make you look as professional as you should. So do yourself a favor, take that off, because I saw it. Every time I saw it, it just made it a little harder for me to take you seriously. Now I did, you were an excellent advocate, but don't do that to yourself. And Mr. Holland, for you, again, I think you are an outstanding advocate. I loved your closing, especially rebuttal. But the whole time I kept sitting there looking and trying to figure out, is that a robe you're wearing? It looks like it's a bathrobe. And I don't mean to be petty, but I can tell you that almost every jury that I've talked to comments on my suit, on opposing counsel's ties or their shoes, because we just have to sit there and watch you, right? And shut up. And so without the tie, especially, I couldn't see the little notches in your lapel. It just looked like you're sitting there in a bathrobe. And it takes you down a notch in terms of your overall professionalism. I might suggest, and look, this isn't the sort of stuff that's going to hit you on your points, but it's distracting. I might suggest throwing on a different blazer, maybe throwing on a tie, because when that stuff is absent, then you won't get these sort of comments in the future. Just think about everything you are doing is for the purpose and the benefit of the jury. So make sure you know exactly that everything is staged just exactly the way you want it. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about, I disagree with my co-judge in terms of the themes. I think the defense theme was pretty good. It was, this business about assumptions. And I definitely agree that I needed to hear it more often. I heard it a lot in the defense expert, but I didn't hear it in any of the other witnesses. I would like to hear that. I think the plaintiff's theme was something along the lines of the end of the beginning. Is that right? So here's the problem, guys. A theme needs to direct the jury as to why you win, and then reminds them how to take the evidence, interpret the evidence, and go your way. And end of the beginning doesn't help me with that. Assumptions does. It helps me a little bit more, but at least it helps me understand that one particular expert, but it doesn't really help with the rest of the case. End of the beginning doesn't really tell me what to do. Let me give you an example. When I used to try a lot of DUI cases, if I had here in Colorado, I think across the country, the BAC limit is 0.08. If I had a blood alcohol result that was over 0.08, then my theme was always over the limit, under the influence. It's catchy, it's easy to understand. It tells my jurors exactly why I win the case. And so I want you guys to take a step back, think a little bit more about that. Why do you win? That's the first, when I coach teams, that's the first thing I ask. Why do you win? And once you figure out why you win, then you can put on your Don Draper hat and you can distill this down into something catchy that is essentially the slogan for your case. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about on closing arguments, I thought both you guys did a great job. I loved the overall theme, presentation and the tone that you guys had, your presence within the courtroom. To me, what makes the difference between a good closing argument and a great closing argument, between a closing and a really effective closing, it's not about just telling your story again. It's about, again, telling the jury, showing the jury why you win, okay? Helping them to make their decision. You guys all talked about the burden, which is great. A lot of law school students forget that. You guys all talked about the elements of these torts, which is great. A lot of lawyers forget to do that. Okay, the suggestion that I have is I use the elements of my cases in order to structure my closings, because it's all about whether or not I have proven my case. So I go element by element. Let's talk about element number one. Here's what you heard from the case. Here's the witnesses. Here's why I proved it. Moving on to element number two. Here's what you heard. Here's why I proved it. Right. And so making it very clear, laying out not just your story, because I've already heard your story. I heard the other person's story. And at the end of the day, if I don't know what to do when I go back into the jury room, jurors just throw up their hands and that's that. Talk to them about what you have to prove and how you did it, or talk to them about what the other team, the plaintiff or the people have to prove and why they didn't. And if you make that slight adjustment, you're going to see that your openings and closings get that much more effective. All right, that's probably more than my time. I apologize if I kept you guys over. Just outstanding job, guys. Again, I really am extremely impressed with everybody. I will stick around as long as you guys need me to answer individual questions. Good luck.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you.
Mr. Friedberg.
Yes.
I guess I just wanted to ask how it is that we get our scoring ballots in the comments.
Oh, I just asked about. We have to email Elliot Richards. I found it out.
I don't know the answer to that because I'm not a scoring judge and I don't have comments for you. At least not written comments.
Okay.